At the grocery store checkout line, I paid exactly $12.40 for an elderly stranger's milk and eggs. It was a small act of kindness, or so I thought. But as she packed her bag, her trembling hand brushed against my sleeve. She leaned in her breath, smelling of peppermint and fear, and whispered a sentence that would freeze my blood colder than the Detroit winter outside. She said, "When your son leaves, do not touch the snow in your yard. Just watch." I laughed it off as the ramblings of a confused old soul. But the next morning, standing on my porch, with my heart hammering against my ribs, what I saw in the white drifts made me realize that $12 had just bought me a ticket into a nightmare. Before I tell you what I found buried in that snow, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever felt like a stranger in your own home. I am Isaiah Jefferson, 72 years old. My hands are rough from 40 years on the Ford assembly line, and my patience is worn thin by a world that seems to have forgotten the meaning of dignity. Since my wife Bernice passed 5 years ago, my life has been a quiet loop of solitude. I wake up, I drink black coffee, and I count the pennies in my jar. I do not ask for much. I just want peace. But peace is expensive these days. It was a Tuesday at Aldi, the one on the corner of 8 Mile. The fluorescent lights hummed with that headache-inducing buzz I have hated for decades. I was standing in line behind a woman who looked like she carried the weight of the entire city on her slumped shoulders. She wore a coat that had seen better decades, the wool pilling at the elbows. When the cashier, a young girl with chewing gum snapping in her mouth, announced the total, the woman froze. She started digging through her purse, pulling out crumpled dollar bills and copper pennies. She was short, $12.40 short. The cashier rolled her eyes, tapping her long acrylic nails on the counter. The line behind us shifted. People sighed. I saw the shame rising up the woman's neck, turning her dark skin a shade of deep plum. I knew that heat. I knew what it felt like to be looked at as an inconvenience rather than a human being. I stepped forward. I did not say a word. I just slid my debit card into the machine. The beep of approval sounded like a gavel falling in a courtroom. The woman looked up at me. Her eyes were milky with cataracts, but behind that cloudiness there was a sharpness that startled me. She did not smile. She did not say thank you in the way people usually do. She looked terrified. That was when she leaned in. The distance between us vanished. Her whisper was urgent, a jagged piece of glass. "When your son leaves, do not touch the snow in your yard. Just watch." I tried to ask her what she meant, but she grabbed her bags and scurried out the automatic doors before I could finish my sentence. I walked to my beat-up Ford sedan, the words echoing in my mind. My son Damon. How did she know I had a son I hadn't seen Damon in 3 months? He only called when he needed money or when his latest get-rich-quick scheme had imploded. I sat in my car watching the snow fall on the windshield. The wipers slapped back and forth like a metronome counting down time. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Speak of the devil. It was Damon. "Open the gate, Dad," he said. "No hello. No asking how my arthritis was doing. Just a command. We are outside." I drove home, my stomach tightening into a knot. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw them. Damon's massive black truck was parked crookedly blocking my garage. He was leaning against the hood, typing furiously on his phone. And there was his wife, Jessica. She was standing by the porch, wrapping her expensive beige coat tighter around herself, looking at my house as if it were a condemned building she had the misfortune of visiting. I got out of the car. The cold wind bit at my face, but the chill coming from my son was worse. "Hey, old man," Damon said, finally looking up. He looked tired. His eyes were bloodshot, and he had lost weight. He looked like a man who had been running even though he was standing still. Jessica forced a smile. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile you give to a child you don't like. "Hi, Isaiah," she said. Her voice was high and airy. "We have a little surprise. Our apartment is undergoing emergency renovations. A pipe burst. Can you believe it? So we need to crash here for a few days, just until the contractors finish." I looked at the two of them. Renovations. I knew a lie when I heard one. I worked with machines my whole life. Machines don't lie. Parts fit or they don't. And this story didn't fit. But what was I supposed to do? He was my son. Bernice made me promise on her deathbed that I would always keep the door open for him. So I unlocked the front door. The smell of old wood and lemon polish welcomed me, a scent that usually brought me comfort. But Jessica wrinkled her nose immediately. "Oh," she said, sniffing the air. It smells so vintage in here. We should probably open a window, let some of that old air out. It is 20 degrees outside, Jessica, I said, walking past her to hang up my coat. The air is fine. Damon didn't even take off his boots. He tracked slush and mud right onto the carpet Bernice had picked out 30 years ago. He walked straight to the window in the living room and peered out through the blinds, scanning the street. He wasn't looking at the view, he was checking to see if anyone had followed them. "Everything okay, son?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe of the kitchen. "Yeah, fine," he snapped too quickly. "Just work stress. You know how it is. I didn't know how it was." My work stress involved quotas and conveyor belts. His work stress involved crypto wallets and mysterious investors. He carried 2 large duffel bags into the house. He didn't take them to the guest room. He kept them right by his feet. That night, the atmosphere in the house was heavy enough to crush a man. We ate dinner in silence. Jessica pushed her peas around her plate, looking at the kitchen cabinets with disdain. She started talking about how much this house could fetch on the market if we just tore down the walls and updated the fixtures. She talked about me moving into a facility. "A nice one," she said, "with people your own age." I chewed my pot roast slowly. "I am not going anywhere," I said. "This is my house." Damon dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the china. "Just listen to her, Dad. You are getting older. It is dangerous to be here alone. What if you fall? What if something happens?" The concern in his voice felt rehearsed. I looked at him, really looked at him. My son used to have a laugh that could fill a stadium. Now he looked like a cornered animal. I went to bed early, but I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside. The old house groaned and settled sounds I knew by heart. But around 2 in the morning, I heard something new. It was a thud, heavy and dull, coming from the basement. My bedroom is on the first floor, but the heating vents carry sound like a telephone wire. I held my breath. I heard footsteps, heavy boots on concrete, then the creak of the back door that leads from the basement out to the yard. I sat up. The warning from the woman at the store crashed into my mind. "When your son leaves, do not touch the snow." I crept to my window. The blinds were drawn, but I peered through a crack. The storm had picked up. The snow was coming down in thick sheets, blinding and white. I couldn't see much, just 2 dark shapes moving near the old oak tree in the backyard. That tree was where we buried our golden retriever Buster 10 years ago. It was sacred ground. I saw the flicker of a flashlight. I heard the unmistakable sound of metal hitting frozen earth. Clang. Scrape. They were digging. In the middle of a blizzard at 2 in the morning, my son and his wife were digging a hole in my backyard. I wanted to run out there. I wanted to grab my shotgun and demand to know what was happening. But fear paralyzed me. Not fear for myself, but fear of what I might find. Fear that the son I raised had brought something into my home that I couldn't fix with a wrench and a screwdriver. The digging went on for 20 minutes. Then silence. I heard them come back inside. I heard the water running in the kitchen sink. They were washing their hands. I heard Jessica's voice, a harsh whisper that traveled up the vents. "Did you cover it deep enough?" she hissed. "It is fine," Damon whispered back. "The snow will cover everything by morning. No one will know." I lay back down, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I clutched the quilt Bernice had sewn, wishing she were here to tell me I was imagining things, but I knew I wasn't. Morning came with a deceptive brightness. The sun reflected off the fresh snow, creating a blinding glare. I heard the engine of Damon's truck revving. I got up and walked to the kitchen. The house was empty. A note was on the counter. "Gone to get breakfast. Be back soon." I walked to the sliding glass door that looked out over the backyard. My breath fogged up the glass. The yard was a pristine blanket of white, beautiful, peaceful. But then I looked closer. I put on my glasses. The woman at the store had told me to watch. So I watched. The snow was smooth, yes. But over by the oak tree, about 30 feet from the porch, the texture was wrong. It was too flat, too perfect. Nature is chaotic. The wind piles snow in drifts and curves. But there was a square patch about 3 feet wide where the snow looked like it had been patted down with a shovel, flat as a pancake. And there was something else. A set of footprints leading away from it, partially filled in by the morning drift, but still visible if you knew where to look. They were distinct. One foot dragged slightly. Damon had twisted his ankle playing football in high school. He always dragged his left foot when he was tired or carrying something heavy. I stood there, my hand hovering over the door handle. Every instinct in my body told me to go out there, to grab a shovel, to uncover whatever dirty secret my son had buried in the soil of my home. But the warning echoed again. Don't touch the snow. Why was it a bomb? Was it a body? Was it drugs? I realized then that if I walked out there, I would leave my own footprints. If someone was watching, and suddenly I felt very strongly that someone was, they would know I had found it. I needed to be smarter. I needed to see without being seen. I went to the hall closet and reached for my old binoculars, the ones I used for birdwatching. I brought them to my eyes and focused the lenses on the disturbed patch of snow. The magnification brought the truth inches from my face. The wind shifted a layer of powder, revealing just the tiniest corner of something that didn't belong in a garden. It wasn't a root. It wasn't a rock. It was black nylon. A strap. My blood ran cold. It was one of the duffel bags Damon had brought in the night before. Suddenly I heard a sound behind me. Not the front door opening. Not a car pulling up. It was the sound of a floorboard creaking right behind my head. I spun around. Jessica was standing in the doorway of the kitchen. She wasn't wearing her coat, she was wearing her silk pajamas, holding a steaming mug of coffee. She hadn't gone to breakfast with Damon. She looked at me, then she looked past me out the window directly at the patch of disturbed snow. Then her eyes snapped back to mine. The fake, airy smile was gone. In its place was a look of cold, calculated malice that made her look 10 years older. "Good morning, Dad," she said, taking a slow sip of her coffee. "You are up early, looking for something." My hand gripped the binoculars tight. I realized in that moment that the woman standing in my kitchen was not just a rude daughter-in-law. She was a guard dog. And I was the intruder in my own home. I lowered the binoculars slowly. "Just watching the birds, Jessica," I lied. "Just watching the birds." She took a step closer. "You know," she said softly, her voice dripping with threat, "birds who look too closely at the ground sometimes get eaten by cats. You should be careful." I looked at her and then back at the snow. The game had begun, and I didn't even know the rules yet. But I knew one thing: if I wanted to survive the winter, I had to stop being a father and start being a soldier again. End of part 1. The sound of water rushing through the pipes was my starting gun. Upstairs, the shower turned on a heavy, thumping rhythm that vibrated through the old timber frame of the house. Jessica was in the bathroom. Damon had taken the truck to get coffee, or so he claimed. I had 10 minutes, maybe 15, if she decided to wash her hair. I did not waste a second. I pulled on my heavy rubber boots, the ones I used to wear when the basement flooded during the spring thaws, and grabbed my parka. I didn't zip it. The cold would keep me sharp. I slid the glass door open just enough to squeeze my body through, trying to keep the rollers from squealing in their tracks. The air outside hit me like a physical blow, 20 degrees below freezing and biting. But the chill on my skin was nothing compared to the cold knot in my stomach. I stepped off the porch, placing my feet carefully. I didn't walk in a straight line. I stepped into the deep, drift-filled depressions where the wind had already carved paths, trying to mask my own weight. I made my way to the old oak tree. From the window it had looked like a flat patch of snow. Up close to an eye that spent 40 years measuring gaps in engine blocks down to the millimeter, it was a sloppy cover-up. The snow here didn't have the natural wind-swept crust of the surrounding yard. It was fragmented, powdery. Someone had packed it down with the back of a shovel, trying to smooth it out like body filler on a dented fender. But nature doesn't make perfect plains. Nature makes chaos. This flatness was a lie. I knelt down, my knees popping in the cold. I brushed away the top layer of white powder. Underneath the snow was dirty, mixed with dark soil. They hadn't even dug deep enough to hit the frost line. Amateur work, lazy work. I used my gloved hands as shovels, digging frantically. The earth was hard, resisting my fingers, but the soil was loose enough to tell me it had been turned over less than 6 hours ago. My breath came in short white puffs of steam. I felt like a grave robber in my own backyard. My fingers hooked onto something synthetic. A strap. I pulled. The earth gave way and I hauled a heavy black sports bag out of the hole. It was a cheap nylon thing, the kind you buy at a discount store for $10, but it was heavy. Unnaturally heavy. It clanked as I dragged it onto the surface, the sound of metal on metal muffled by the canvas. I looked back at the house. The bathroom window was still steamed up. I unzipped the bag. The morning sun caught the contents, and for a second I was blinded. Gold, silver, diamonds. It wasn't a jumble of old clothes or family heirlooms. It was a dragon's hoard. There were dozens of watches, Rolexes with their distinct fluted bezels wrapped in soft velvet pouches or just loose clinking against each other. There were diamond tennis bracelets still attached to their velvet display cards. Rings with stones the size of my thumbnail. I picked up a watch. It was heavy cold and solid gold. The tag was still on it. $25,000. I dropped it back into the bag as if it had burned me. I did a quick mental calculation. There had to be at least $500,000 worth of merchandise in this dirty gym bag. My mind flashed back to the news report I had half listened to 3 days ago while eating my oatmeal. The jeweler's exchange downtown. 2 men in masks. A smash and grab. The clerk was pistol whipped. The getaway driver was in a black truck. Damon drove a black truck. My son. The boy I had taught to ride a bike on this very lawn. The boy I had lectured about the value of an honest day's pay until I was blue in the face. He wasn't just a failure. He wasn't just bad with money. He was a criminal. And he had brought his crime into my sanctuary. He had buried a felony next to the grave of our family dog. The siren song of the police dispatcher played in my head. Call 911. Tell them everything. Hand over the bag. It was the right thing to do. It was the law. But then I thought about the police in this town. I thought about a 72-year-old black man standing over a bag of stolen diamonds in his backyard. I thought about Damon's stupid, desperate Damon walking into a police ambush. They wouldn't arrest him. They would shoot him. And Jessica. She was the one with the brains. She was the one with the cold eyes. She would spin a story that left me holding the bag literally and figuratively. No, I couldn't call them. I couldn't call. Not yet. I needed leverage. I needed to control the board before I made a move. I zipped the bag shut. I couldn't leave it here. If they checked, they would see it was gone. But I couldn't bring it into my bedroom. That was the first place they would look if they got suspicious. I needed a hiding spot that was part of the house yet invisible to the people living in it. I looked at the side of the house, the chimney, the old brick chimney for the wood stove in the basement that we hadn't used since 1998. When I converted the furnace to gas, I had capped the bottom, but the clean-out door on the side of the foundation was still there, painted shut and hidden behind a row of overgrown holly bushes. I dragged the bag through the snow, staying close to the house foundation where the overhang kept the snow thin. I shoved through the scratchy holly branches, ignoring the thorns tearing at my parka. I found the small iron door. It was rusted, but I knew the trick. A sharp kick to the hinge pin, a leverage point with my pocket knife, and it groaned open. It was a dark, soot-filled throat leading into the bowels of the house. I shoved the bag inside. It fit perfectly. I pushed it deep until it fell down into the ash pit completely out of sight. I kicked the door shut and smeared some wet dirt over the fresh scratches on the metal. It looked undisturbed. Now the hard part. The hole. I ran back to the oak tree. I pushed the dirt back into the depression. I stomped it down, trying to mimic the density of the surrounding ground. Then I became an artist. I scooped up fresh, clean snow from the untouched parts of the yard and sprinkled it over the dirty patch. I used a pine branch to brush away my footprints, walking backward, erasing my existence step by step until I reached the porch. I smoothed out the final drift, making sure the wind patterns looked natural. It wasn't perfect. If you looked with binoculars, you might see the disturbance. But to the naked eye from the kitchen window, it was just a snowy backyard. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a piston in a red-lined engine. I was sweating inside my coat, cold sweat that made my skin crawl. I checked the house. The water was still running. I had done it. I stepped back onto the porch and slid the glass door open. I slipped inside the warmth of the kitchen hitting me. I locked the door. I bent down to pull off my boots, my hands shaking slightly. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, trying to compose the face of a senile, oblivious old man. I stood up and turned around to hang my coat, and my heart stopped. Jessica was standing right there. She wasn't in the shower. The water running upstairs was a decoy. She was standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, leaning against the frame. She was wearing a silk robe that looked like it cost more than my car. In her hand was a steaming mug of coffee. She didn't look sleepy. Her eyes were wide alert and dead cold. She looked at my wet boots. She looked at the melting snow on the shoulders of my parka. Then she looked past me out the glass door to the yard I had just come from. "Good morning, Dad," she said. Her voice was smooth, devoid of any warmth. It was the voice of a predator toying with a wounded rabbit. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry as sandpaper. "Good morning, Jessica," I managed to say. "I thought you were showering." "Oh, I was just letting the water warm up," she said, taking a slow sip of her coffee, never taking her eyes off me. "You are up early." And outside in this weather, I forced a laugh, a dry cracking sound. Just checking the fence. The wind last night sounded like it might have brought a branch down. "Is that so?" she asked. She took a step closer. The smell of her expensive perfume was overpowering, masking the smell of the coffee. She tilted her head, a small, cruel smile playing on her lips. "You know, Dad, looking for things that are not yours is a dangerous habit." I froze. Did she know? Did she see me? She took another step, invading my personal space. She reached out with a manicured hand and brushed a snowflake off my shoulder. By the way she whispered, her voice dropping an octave. "Did you happen to see an old black gym bag out there? I think Damon left some old clothes in it. We can't seem to find it anywhere." The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. If I said yes, I had to produce it. If I said no, she would know I was lying if she checked the hole. I looked her dead in the eye, summoning every ounce of grit I had left from 40 years on the assembly line. "No," I said. "I didn't see any bag. Just snow." Jessica stared at me for a long beat. The smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "That is strange," she said softly. "Very strange. Because things don't just vanish, Isaiah. Not in this house." She turned and walked toward the stairs, leaving me standing in a puddle of melting snow, knowing that the war had just officially begun. I looked Jessica dead in the eye and lied with the straight face of a man who has played poker with life for 72 years. "Just fixing the fence, Jessica." The storm knocked a slat loose near the back gate. I didn't want the neighbor's dog getting in. It was a simple lie, plausible enough to work on a normal person. But Jessica was not normal. She did not blink. She stood there in her silk robe, holding that steaming mug of coffee like a weapon, studying my face for a microsecond of hesitation. She took a slow, deliberate sip. "Is that right?" she said, her voice dropping to a register that vibrated with suspicion. "You are very industrious for a man with such bad arthritis, Isaiah. Most men your age would be napping in a recliner, not playing handyman in sub-zero temperatures." I shrugged, forcing my shoulders to relax, forcing my heartbeat to slow down. "I like to stay useful. Bernice always said a house falls apart the moment you stop touching it." At the mention of my late wife, Jessica's lip curled just slightly, a micro-expression of disgust. She set her coffee down on the counter with a sharp clink. "Well, since you are in such a productive mood, I think I will do some cleaning. This place is cluttered. It is hard to think with so much junk everywhere." She didn't wait for my permission. She walked into the living room, my sanctuary, and began her assault. She called it cleaning, but I knew what it was. It was a search warrant executed without a judge. She started with the bookshelves. She pulled out my old manuals, the photo albums from the 80s, shaking them out as if looking for dust, but I saw her eyes scanning the empty spaces behind them. She moved the sofa cushions, digging her hand deep into the crevices. She opened the drawers of the antique secretary desk where I kept my bills and correspondence. Every object she touched felt like a violation. That Bible she tossed aside was a gift from my mother. That ceramic vase she shifted roughly was the first anniversary present I bought for Bernice. I stood in the doorway, gripping my cane, watching her dismantle my life piece by piece. "What are you looking for, Jessica?" I asked, keeping my voice level. She didn't look up. "Just organizing, Dad. You have so many hidey holes in this old place. It is a fire hazard." She was tearing the house apart, looking for the bag. She knew I had been outside. She knew the snow didn't look right. She was testing me, pushing me, waiting for me to panic and glance toward the hiding spot. But I didn't look at the fireplace. I didn't even think about the chimney. I kept my eyes glued to her, letting her see nothing but a confused, slightly irritated old man. Then the rumble of a heavy engine cut through the tension. Damon was back. I heard the truck door slam, followed by the heavy thud of boots on the porch. The front door swung open, bringing a gust of freezing air into the room. Damon walked in carrying a tray of coffees and a bag of bagels, his face flushed from the cold, but wearing a grin that looked plastered on. "Breakfast is served," he announced, trying to sound cheerful. "Got your favorite, Dad. Black coffee, 2 sugars. He froze when he saw the state of the living room. Books were piled on the floor. Cushions were overturned. Jessica was standing in the middle of the chaos, her hands on her hips, breathing hard. "What is going on?" Damon asked, his smile faltering. Jessica ignored him. She walked right up to him, invading his personal space. "Did you check the yard?" Damon looked confused. "What? No. I just got back. I went to get the coffee." "Check the yard, Damon," she hissed. "Now!" The urgency in her voice wiped the smile off his face completely. He dropped the tray on the hallway table, coffee splashing over the rim, and ran to the sliding glass door in the kitchen. I moved to my armchair and sat down, feigning exhaustion. I picked up the newspaper, but I wasn't reading. I was listening. I heard the sliding door open. I heard Damon's heavy steps crunching into the snow. Then silence. A long, terrifying silence. I could imagine exactly what he was seeing. The patch of snow that looked just a little too flat. The disturbance near the oak tree. I heard the sound of frantic digging. He wasn't using a shovel. He was using his hands. The sound of wet gloves scraping against frozen earth echoed into the kitchen. He was digging like a desperate dog. Then a howl. Not of pain, but of pure, unadulterated terror. "No!" Damon stormed back into the house. He didn't bother closing the sliding door. The wind howled into the kitchen, but he didn't feel the cold. His face was the color of ash. He looked like he had seen a ghost. "It is gone, Jess. It is gone." He ran into the living room, his hands covered in mud and snow, shaking violently. "The hole is empty. It is just dirt." "Where is it? Where is the bag?" Jessica didn't scream. She didn't panic. She went perfectly still. She looked at Damon, then she turned her head slowly like a mechanical doll and looked at me. I turned the page of my newspaper. "Is everything all right out there?" I asked, my voice trembling just the right amount. "You are letting the heat out, son." Jessica walked over to the sliding door and slammed it shut. Then she grabbed Damon by the collar of his expensive coat and dragged him into the kitchen. She thought they were out of earshot. She thought the running refrigerator compressor would mask their voices. But she forgot that I had lived in this house for 40 years. I knew every acoustic quirk. I knew that if you sat in the armchair by the window, the air vent carried sound from the kitchen as clearly as a radio. I leaned my head back against the chair, closing my eyes, and listened to the unraveling of my family. "You said you buried it deep." Jessica's voice was a venomous whisper. "I did. I swear I did." Damon sounded like he was crying. "I put it right under the roots. I covered it. No one could have found it." "Someone found it, you idiot," Jessica snapped. "And I will give you one guess who." There was a sharp cracking sound. Flesh hitting flesh. She had slapped him. I flinched in my chair. Damon whimpered. "Dad? No way. He is old Jess. He can barely walk to the mailbox. He doesn't know anything." "Don't be so naive," she hissed. "Did you see his boots this morning?" "They were wet. He was out there. He was watching us last night. I told you he was trouble. I told you we should have put him in the home immediately, but if he has it, why didn't he call the police?" Damon asked, his voice shaking. "Why are the cops not here?" "Because he is playing with us," Jessica replied. Her voice sent a shiver down my spine. It was cold, calculating, devoid of any humanity. "He is not just a senile old man, Damon. He is holding it hostage. He wants to leverage it. Or maybe he just wants to see us squirm. He is playing psychological warfare." "What do we do?" Damon's voice pitched up in panic. "The investors. If we don't have the merchandise by Friday, they will kill us, Jess. You know they will. They will cut us into pieces." "Shut up," Jessica commanded. "Stop crying. We are not going to die. We just need to change tactics. We came in here too hot. We scared him. Now he has his guard up. We need to lower it. How we kill him with kindness," she said. "And if that doesn't work, well, there are other ways to deal with a stubborn old obstacle." I sat there gripping the armrests of my chair until my knuckles turned white. The investors. That confirmed it. They weren't just thieves. They were in debt to dangerous people. And now Jessica wasn't just an unpleasant daughter-in-law. She was a cornered animal plotting my extinction. The rest of the afternoon passed in a bizarre, suffocating tension. Jessica stopped tearing the house apart. She put the books back. She fluffed the pillows. She even apologized for the mess, claiming she was just stress cleaning. Damon sat on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, his leg bouncing nervously, terrified to look me in the eye. Then came dinner. The smell wafted from the kitchen around 6 o'clock. It was rich, savory, and familiar. Beef stew, my favorite meal. Bernice used to make it every Sunday. The scent of rosemary and thyme filled the house, a cruel imitation of the warmth that used to live here. "Dinner is ready," Jessica called out. Her voice was sing-songy, cheerful, completely at odds with the woman who had slapped her husband hours earlier. I walked into the dining room. The table was set perfectly. The good china, napkins folded into triangles. Damon was already seated, staring at his bowl, looking pale. "Sit down, Dad," Jessica said, pulling out my chair. "I made your favorite. I found Bernice's recipe card in the drawer. I wanted to make it up to you for the chaotic morning. We are just so stressed with the house renovations we took it out on you. I am sorry." She placed a steaming bowl of stew in front of me. The meat was tender, the gravy thick and dark. It looked delicious. It smelled like memory. But all I could hear was her voice from the kitchen. "There are other ways to deal with a stubborn old obstacle." I looked at the stew, then I looked at Jessica. She was watching me. Not eating, just watching. Her eyes were bright with anticipation. "It smells wonderful, Jessica," I said. "Thank you." I picked up my spoon. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. I dipped the spoon into the gravy, lifted a piece of beef to my lips. I blew on it. Then I lowered the spoon. "You know, I said I forgot to give Whiskers his scraps. That poor cat has been crying at the back door all day." Jessica's smile tightened. "Can't the cat wait? The stew is getting cold." "He is an old cat," I said, standing up, bowl in hand. "He needs his strength, just like me." Before she could stop me, I walked to the sliding glass door. I opened it a crack. The stray orange tabby that had been visiting my porch for 3 years was there shivering against the brickwork. He looked up at me with hungry yellow eyes. "Here you go, boy," I whispered. I dumped a spoonful of meat and gravy onto the concrete porch. The cat pounced on it immediately, devouring the beef in 2 bites. I stood there, blocking Jessica's view with my body, watching. "Come back and eat." "Isaiah," Jessica said, her voice sharp, losing its sweetness. "Just a second," I said. I watched the cat lick its chops. It looked up at me, purring. Then suddenly it stopped. The cat let out a low, guttural yowl. Its body went rigid. It fell onto its side legs, kicking violently. Foam began to bubble at the corners of its mouth. It convulsed once, twice, its claws scraping against the frozen concrete in a desperate rhythm. And then it went still. Its yellow eyes stared blankly into the snow. The wind blew into the kitchen, carrying the chill of death. My hand shook so hard the spoon rattled against the bowl. I turned around slowly. Jessica was standing by the table, clutching her napkin. Damon had his hands over his mouth. I looked down at the bowl of stew in my hand. Then I looked at the woman who had cooked it. "I am not very hungry tonight," I said quietly. "I think I will just have water." I poured the entire bowl of stew into the trash can. The sound of the heavy meat hitting the bottom of the bin was the only sound in the house. I walked out of the kitchen, feeling their eyes burning into my back, knowing that tonight I wouldn't be sleeping. I would be barricading my door. The war wasn't coming. It was already here. And the first casualty was lying dead on my porch. The air inside my house had become toxic, thick with the invisible fumes of betrayal and the very real threat of digoxin, so I had to get out. I waited until I heard the heavy, rhythmic snoring of my son from the living room couch and the shower running upstairs for Jessica. I slipped out the back door, my boots crunching softly on the fresh layer of snow that had fallen overnight, covering the sins of the previous days. I did not take my car. The sound of the engine would have been a clarion call to my executioners. Instead, over 70 years of age and with a heart condition that they were trying to exploit, I walked. I walked 3 miles to the bus stop on the main road, the wind cutting through my coat like a razor blade. I needed to find the woman from the grocery store. I needed to find Etta May. I did not know her address, but I knew people. A lifetime in this city, working on the line, going to church, and fixing cars on the weekends meant I had a network of eyes and ears that went deeper than any internet search engine. I stopped at the local diner where the old-timers gathered for coffee. A few questions, a description of her coat, and the distinct way she walked, and I had a lead. She lived in the Bottoms, a neighborhood that city planners had forgotten and developers were waiting to bulldoze. It was a place where hope went to die, characterized by boarded-up windows and stray dogs that looked more like wolves. I found her in the basement of a dilapidated tenement building. She was wringing out a mop into a bucket of gray water, the smell of bleach overpowering the scent of mildew. When she saw me standing in the doorway, silhouetted by the gray afternoon light, she dropped the mop. She backed away until she hit the cinderblock wall, her eyes wide with terror. She thought I was one of them. She thought I had come to silence the only witness to a crime I was just beginning to understand. I raised my hand slowly, showing her my empty palms. "I am not here to hurt you, Etta," I said, my voice raspy from the cold. "I am here because I touched the snow. And now I need to know why." She stared at me for a long time, her chest heaving. Then, seeing the desperation etched into the lines of my face, she slumped onto a plastic crate. She looked tired, bone-deep tired. She gestured for me to sit on a stack of old newspapers, and then she told me the story that unraveled the last thread of my naive belief in my family. Etta was not just a shopper at Aldi. She was the night janitor at the Majestic Jewelers Exchange downtown, the same jewelry store that had been robbed 3 days ago. She was there that night cleaning the executive offices when the alarm should have gone off. But it didn't. She heard the heavy steel door of the loading dock open. She hid in the supply closet, peering through the slats of the ventilation grate. She saw 2 men in ski masks enter, but they weren't moving with the frantic energy of smash-and-grab thugs. They were calm. They walked straight to the main vault. And then she saw the third person. The person who didn't wear a mask. It was Jessica, my daughter-in-law, the woman who complained about the smell of my house. She wasn't just a bystander, she was the manager. I felt the bile rise in my throat as Etta described how Jessica punched the code into the keypad, a code only the manager and the owner knew. The vault swung open. Jessica laughed. Etta said, "It was a cold, hard sound." She started tossing trays of diamonds and watches into black duffel bags, the same bags Damon had carried into my living room. And the driver, Etta, saw him take off his mask to wipe sweat from his forehead. It was Damon, my son, the boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee. He was the wheelman for a $500,000 heist orchestrated by his wife. Etta told me they had a plan for the police. They wiped the security tapes, but they planted evidence in the janitor's locker. A few loose rings, a map of the store. They were setting Etta up to take the fall. That was why she was hiding. That was why she was terrified. She had seen the devil in a beige coat, and she knew that anyone who got in Jessica's way would be crushed. We sat in that damp basement, 2 ghosts haunted by the same demons. The puzzle pieces clicked together with a sickening finality. The debt, the sudden visit, the digging in the yard, the poison. They needed a place to stash the loot until the heat died down, and they needed a fall guy if things went south. I was the perfect solution. A senile old man with a big house and a bad heart. If I died, they got the inheritance and the house to launder the money. If the police came, they would claim I was confused that I had found the bags and hidden them, or worse, that I was part of it. I stood up, my knees cracking. "We have to go to the police, Etta," I said. "You are a witness." She laughed, a bitter, dry sound. "Which police, Isaiah?" "The ones in this precinct." "Do you know who the sheriff is?" I paused. Sheriff Miller. A man I had voted for. A man who grilled hot dogs at the community picnic. "Sheriff Miller and Jessica went to high school together," Etta whispered. "They were prom king and queen. I saw him at the store last week, laughing with her in her office. I saw him touch her hand. He is not going to arrest her, Isaiah. He is going to help her bury us." The realization hit me like a physical blow. The local law was not an option. Jessica had insulated herself with layers of corruption and manipulation. If I called 911, I wouldn't be calling for help. I would be calling for my own arrest. We were alone. "We need the FBI," I said, my mind racing. "This is a federal crime, interstate commerce. Miller can't touch the feds." Etta nodded slowly. "I have a cousin. He works maintenance at the federal building downtown. He might know a number. A real number. Not the hotline." I grabbed her hand. "Call him. Get the number. I have to go back. Go back." Etta looked at me like I was insane. "They will kill you, Isaiah. Don't go back to that house." "I have to," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "The bag is there. The recording of Jessica admitting to the poisoning is there. If I don't go back, they will destroy the evidence and disappear. I have to hold the line until you get the feds." I left her with $20, all the cash I had, and walked back into the cold. The journey home felt different. I wasn't walking away from fear anymore. I was walking toward a war. I formulated a plan. I would barricade the attic. I would use my tools. I would turn my home into a fortress until the cavalry arrived. But I was too late. As I turned the corner onto my street, the flashing lights blinded me. Red and blue strobes bounced off the snow, painting the white world in violent colors. 3 squad cars were parked on my lawn, their tires churning up the grass I had tended for decades. I stopped hiding behind the trunk of a large maple tree across the street. I watched as the front door of my house opened. Sheriff Miller walked out, his hat pulled low, his face grim, and next to him was Jessica. She wasn't in handcuffs. She was wrapped in a blanket, shaking sobbing into her hands. A performance worthy of an Academy Award. She pointed a trembling finger toward the street, toward where I usually parked my car. I could hear her voice carrying over the wind, shrill and hysterical. "He is dangerous, Sheriff. He has completely lost his mind. He has been talking to people who aren't there. He threatened Damon with a knife. He said the government is coming for him, and he has a gun, Sheriff. He has an old service pistol hidden somewhere. I am so afraid for my husband. You have to find him before he hurts someone." Sheriff Miller nodded, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry, Jess. We will find him. He won't get far." He unholstered his weapon. I stood in the shadows, my heart hammering against my ribs. I wasn't the victim anymore. In the eyes of the law, I was now an armed and dangerous lunatic, and the man hunting me was the childhood sweetheart of the woman trying to kill me. I couldn't go home. I couldn't go to the police. I had the truth on my side, but they had the badges and the guns. I turned around and vanished into the darkness, knowing that the only way to save my life was to let them think I was the monster they claimed I was. I stood in the corner of my living room, my hands trembling not from fear but from a rage so hot it felt like it was burning the lining of my stomach. My home, the sanctuary where I had loved my wife and raised my son, was being violated. Sheriff Miller had unleashed his deputies like a pack of hunting dogs. They did not look like officers of the law. They looked like demolition experts. They pulled the cushions off the sofa and sliced them open with box cutters, sending feathers drifting through the air like snow. They swept the books off the shelves, the heavy volumes hitting the floor with thuds that sounded like punches. They opened the drawers of the antique secretary desk and dumped my papers, my bills, and the letters Bernice had written me during the war onto the carpet, stomping on them with their muddy boots. Jessica stood by the front door, wrapped in a blanket, weeping into a tissue. It was a performance that sickened me. She sobbed about how terrified she was, about how I had been talking to invisible people, about how I had threatened to cut her throat while she slept. Sheriff Miller patted her shoulder, his eyes scanning the room, not looking for a weapon but looking for a black gym bag. I knew exactly what was happening. Jessica had told him where she thought the diamonds were. She must have told him they were under the floorboards or in the vents. But as the minutes ticked by and the deputies came up empty-handed, the tension in the room shifted. The sheriff's jaw tightened. He shot a look at Jessica that was not comforting. It was demanding. He was silently asking her where the loot was. I watched them tear the drywall off the pantry. I watched them smash the ceramic vase Bernice had loved. They were not looking for a pistol. You do not check inside a flower jar for a pistol. You do not rip up the corner of a carpet to find a gun. They were looking for the payday. And the fact that they could not find it was making them desperate. One of the younger deputies, a boy with a buzz cut who looked like he had barely graduated high school, came out of my bedroom. He caught Jessica's eye. She gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. The deputy turned to Sheriff Miller. "Sheriff," he called out, his voice cracking slightly, "I think I found something. Under the pillow." My stomach dropped. I knew what was under my pillow. A rosary and a spare handkerchief, that was all. But the deputy reached in and pulled out a long, serrated kitchen knife. The blade was smeared with something red and wet. Jessica let out a scream that could have shattered glass. "Oh my God. That is the knife. That is the knife," he held to my throat. "Look at the blood. He must have cut himself or killed an animal." The deputy held the knife up like a trophy. Sheriff Miller walked over, his face grim. "Well now, Isaiah," he said, turning to me, "this changes things. Assault with a deadly weapon. Possession of evidence of a violent crime." I looked at the knife. It was one of my steak knives from the kitchen block. And the blood, I could smell it from 10 feet away. It did not smell like iron and copper like human blood. It smelled metallic and gamey. It was chicken blood. Jessica must have taken it from the package of thighs she had thawed for the stew I refused to eat. It was a crude, insulting frame-up. I did not scream. I did not struggle. I stepped forward, leaning heavily on my cane, drawing myself up to my full height of 6 feet. I looked Sheriff Miller in the eye. I have lived in this town for 40 years, Miller, I said, my voice low and steady. I fixed your father's transmission in '82. I know you, and I know you are not stupid. Miller narrowed his eyes. Watch your mouth, Jefferson. That is chicken blood, I continued, pointing at the knife. And that deputy did not find it under my pillow because 5 minutes ago I was in that room and the bed was made. If you want to arrest me for having a kitchen utensil in my own home, you go ahead. But I want a forensics team here. I want a DNA test on that blood, and I want to see the search warrant signed by a judge that specifies you can destroy my property looking for a phantom weapon based on the word of a woman who is currently under investigation by the FBI. The room went silent. The mention of the FBI hit Miller like a physical slap. He glanced at Jessica. She looked pale. What are you talking about? Miller growled, but his hand moved away from his handcuffs. I stepped closer. You think I am just a senile old man, I said. I know about the robbery, I know about the bag, and I know that my attorney has already filed a motion regarding my safety. If you arrest me right now without a proper warrant and without a federal observer, you are going to open a door you cannot close. Do you really want the feds looking into your relationship with my daughter-in-law? It was a bluff, a massive, dangerous gamble. I did not have a lawyer on speed dial yet. Etta was still trying to reach her contact, but Miller did not know that. He knew Jessica was dirty. He knew the heist was real. And the fear that I might actually know something that I might have already tipped off, the authorities made him hesitate. He looked at the knife, then at Jessica, then at me. He realized that if he took me in, I would talk. And if he took me in, he couldn't beat the location of the diamonds out of me in a holding cell without risking a federal inquiry. He needed me here. He needed me in this house where he could control the environment. Miller lowered his voice. You are a danger to yourself and others, Isaiah. But I am a generous man. I don't want to drag a senior citizen to jail in his pajamas. He turned to his deputies. We are done here. Secure the perimeter. Mr. Jefferson is to be placed under immediate house arrest pending a psychiatric evaluation. No one goes in or out without my say-so. We will come back tomorrow with the social workers. Jessica's eyes widened. You are leaving him here? With us? Miller gave her a look that said, Shut up. He is not going anywhere. Jess, you keep an eye on him. Make sure he doesn't hurt himself or lose anything valuable. It was a coded order. He was telling her, I am leaving him to you. Find the bag. Get it done. The deputies filed out, leaving the wreckage of my life behind them. Miller was the last to leave. He stopped at the door, looking at me with cold, dead eyes. Don't try to leave, Isaiah. My boys will be parked at the end of the driveway. If you step off that porch, I will treat it as a jailbreak, and I will shoot. The heavy oak door slammed shut. The lock clicked. The sound of the squad cars fading into the distance left a silence that was heavier than the noise had been. I was alone. I stood in the middle of my ruined living room, feathers floating around me like mocking snowflakes. I was trapped. The police were not my rescuers. They were the jailers holding the gate shut so the wolves could eat. I turned slowly. Jessica was standing by the fireplace. The tears were gone. The fear was gone. She was smiling. It was a terrifying, triumphant smile. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, typing a quick message, probably to Miller. Then she looked at the stairs. Damon, she called out softly. He is all yours. I heard the footsteps before I saw him. Heavy, deliberate. My son walked down the stairs. He wasn't the cowering boy who had cried in the kitchen yesterday. He wasn't the nervous wreck shaking over a shovel. He looked hollowed out, his eyes dark and empty. He held something in his hand. It was a roll of thick silver duct tape. He walked into the living room and stopped 3 feet from me. He looked at the destruction around us, then he looked at me. There was no love in his eyes. There was only the desperate, animalistic need for survival. He ripped a long strip of tape off the roll. The sound was a harsh tear that echoed in the quiet house. Rip. Dad, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. I am sorry it has to be this way, but you gave us no choice. He took a step closer, holding the tape like a weapon. Jessica leaned against the wall, crossing her arms, watching with the cold detachment of a scientist observing an experiment. Just give us the bag, Dad, Damon said. Tell us where it is. If you tell us now, I won't have to use this. But if you make me ask twice, I don't know if I can stop myself. I gripped my cane, my knuckles white. I looked at the boy I had taught to fish, the boy I had held when he had nightmares. He was gone. The thing standing in front of me was a stranger wearing my son's face. "Come and get it," I whispered, bracing myself for the violence that was about to begin. "Come and get it." I threw those words at my son like a gauntlet, but I did not wait to see if he would pick it up. I moved. For a man of 72 with bad knees and a heart condition, fear is a powerful lubricant. I spun around my cane, hitting the floor with a rhythmic thud, and lunged for the narrow staircase that led to the attic. I heard Damon behind me. I heard the sticky, tearing sound of the duct tape being pulled from the roll. He shouted something, a guttural noise of frustration, but he hesitated. That hesitation, born perhaps of a flickering memory of the man I used to be, or perhaps just the shock of seeing his prey run, saved me. I scrambled up the wooden steps. My breath tore at my throat like sandpaper. My heart was a drum beating a frantic retreat against my ribs. I reached the top landing and grabbed the heavy iron handle of the attic door. I had reinforced this door 5 years ago after Bernice died, turning the attic into my workshop, my sanctuary, where I fixed toaster ovens and tinkered with old radios. I slammed it shut just as I heard Damon's heavy boots hit the bottom step. I threw the deadbolt. Click. Then the secondary slide lock. Clack. A second later, a heavy weight slammed against the wood from the other side. The door shuddered in its frame dust, raining down from the jamb, but it held. "Open the door, Dad," Damon screamed. His voice was muffled, distorted by the wood and his own panic. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." I backed away, chest heaving, clutching my cane with both hands. I did not answer. I looked around the attic. It was a large, unfinished space filled with the detritus of a lifetime. Old trunks, stacks of National Geographic magazines, broken lamps I swore I would fix one day. The moonlight filtered through the single dormer window, casting long, skeletal shadows across the floorboards. I was safe for the moment, but as I leaned against a stack of boxes to catch my breath, I realized I had just locked myself in a cage, and down below the keepers had the keys to everything that kept me alive. The banging on the door stopped after a few minutes. I heard Damon cursing, then the sound of his footsteps retreating down the stairs. He had gone to get tools, or maybe to get instructions from Jessica. I pressed my ear to the floorboards. I needed to know their next move. Then the darkness became absolute. The single bulb hanging from the rafters flickered once and died. The hum of the old chest freezer in the corner, a comforting background noise I had not even noticed until it was gone, cut out. Silence rushed in to fill the void. Jessica had cut the power. I fumbled for my lighter in my pocket, the flame illuminating my trembling hands. I moved to the small window. I could see the streetlights, but my house was a black hole. Then came the second blow. I pulled out my cell phone. No signal. I checked the small landline unit on my workbench. Dead air. She had cut the phone lines and likely smashed the router. I was completely cut off from the world. Etta could not call me. The FBI could not trace me. I was a ghost in a blackout. But the worst was yet to come. Within an hour, I felt it. The attic was always drafty, but this was different. The residual heat from the house below was vanishing. The floorboards grew cold under my feet. I could see my breath puffing out in white clouds in the beam of my flashlight. Jessica had killed the furnace. Outside, the Detroit winter was raging at 10 degrees below zero. Inside, the temperature was plummeting fast. They did not need to break down the door. They did not need to shoot me. They just had to wait for the cold to seep into my old bones, to slow my heart until it stopped beating. It was a siege. They were freezing me out. I wrapped myself in an old mover's quilt I found in a trunk, but the cold was insidious. It bit through the fabric. It settled in my joints, making my arthritis flare with a white-hot pain. I sat in the darkness, shivering, listening to the wind howl against the roof shingles. I thought about Bernice. She hated the cold. She used to crank the thermostat up to 75 and wear fuzzy socks. I imagined her scolding me now. "Isaiah Jefferson, get up. Do not you dare freeze to death in this attic like a forgotten piece of furniture." She was right. I was not furniture. I was a mechanic. I was a man who could fix anything. And if I could not fix the furnace, I would fix the situation. I stood up, shedding the quilt. I needed to move to stay warm. I needed to think. I swept the beam of my flashlight over my workbench. To anyone else, it was a pile of junk. To me, it was an armory. I picked up a propane blowtorch. It was full. I clicked the igniter and a blue flame hissed into life, cutting through the dark. It was a source of heat, yes, but it was also a weapon. I found a box of 3-inch roofing nails. I found a spool of high-tensile piano wire from the time I tried to repair the upright in the living room. I found a staple gun and a heavy claw hammer. I moved to the door. If they managed to break the lock, they would rush in. I needed to make sure that rush was their biggest mistake. I knelt down, the cold from the floor seeping into my knees. I took the piano wire and strung it across the doorway, shin high, securing it to the heavy beams on either side with industrial staples. In the dark, it was invisible, a tripwire. Then I took the roofing nails. I found a piece of plywood and hammered the nails through it until they poked out the other side like a bed of steel thorns. I positioned the board just inside the door, right where a person would fall if they tripped over the wire. I worked with a grim, silent focus. My hands were numb, my fingers stiff, but my mind was sharp. I was not just building traps, I was reclaiming my agency. Every nail I drove was an act of defiance. Every turn of the wrench was a refusal to die. I moved to the dormer window. It was the only other entry point. It was 3 stories up, but desperate men do desperate things. I took a can of old spray lubricant and coated the floorboards under the window until they were slick as ice. Then I took a heavy pipe wrench and laid it on the sill, ready to swing. I sat back against the workbench, the blowtorch hissing quietly beside me, providing a small circle of warmth. I checked my watch. It was midnight. The house below had been silent for hours. The silence was heavy, pregnant with violence. I knew they were not sleeping. Jessica was planning. Damon was pacing. Then the sound came. It was not the sound of a key in a lock. It was not the sound of a polite knock. Smash! The sound of shattering glass from the first floor echoed up through the ventilation shafts. It was loud, violent, and clumsy. It was the sound of a brick going through a window. My heart hammered. Police do not throw bricks. Police do not break into houses at midnight without sirens. I crept to the floor vent and peered down. I could not see anything, but I could hear voices. They were not the voices of my son or his wife. These were deep, rough voices. Strangers. He is upstairs. I heard Jessica's voice, sharp and eager. In the attic. The door is reinforced. You will need the crowbar. Consider it done. Mrs. Jefferson, a man's voice replied. A voice like gravel. Just have the money ready. We charge extra for disposal. I pulled back from the vent, the blood draining from my face. Disposal. That was the word they used. Not eviction. Disposal. Jessica had realized that waiting for me to freeze was taking too long. She had called in the debt. She had invited the wolves into the sheep pen. These were not family. These were not even criminals with a conscience. These were the hired muscle, the investors Damon was terrified of. They were here to collect their debt, and I was the currency. I picked up the blowtorch in one hand and the hammer in the other. I stood facing the door, listening to the heavy, unfamiliar footsteps thundering up the stairs. There were at least 2 of them, big men. I could hear the wood groaning under their weight. I was cold. I was tired. I was outnumbered. But as I watched the doorknob begin to turn, I felt a strange calm wash over me. I was Isaiah Jefferson. I had built cars that drove across America. I had raised a family. I had buried a wife. And I was not going to let a bunch of cheap thugs take me out in my own attic without a fight that would bring the whole damn house down. I clicked the trigger of the torch. The blue flame roared, eager and hot. Come on in, I whispered into the darkness. Watch your step. The silence of the attic was shattered not by a scream, but by the heavy crunch of boots on the glass I had left scattered in the hallway below. I pressed my eye to the small gap in the floorboards near the ventilation shaft, a vantage point I had used years ago to check for termite damage, but which now served as the only window into the destruction of my world. The blue flame of my blowtorch hissed softly beside me, the only source of warmth in the freezing darkness, casting long dancing shadows against the insulation. I watched as 3 shapes moved into the foyer. They were big men, broad-shouldered and dressed in dark, heavy coats that did not completely hide the bulge of holsters at their waists. They wore ski masks devoid of features, transforming them into faceless monsters. These were not the kind of men who knocked. These were the kind of men who kicked doors down and left no witnesses. Jessica stood at the foot of the stairs, still wrapped in her expensive blanket, but she no longer looked like a victim. In the dim light of the street lamps filtering through the broken front window, her face was sharp, illuminated by the cold glow of malice. She did not flinch at the sight of the intruders. She greeted them. It was a terrifying sight watching the woman who had shared Sunday dinners at my table nod to a masked thug as if he were a contractor arriving to fix the plumbing. "He is upstairs," she said, her voice carrying up the vent with chilling clarity. "In the attic. The door is reinforced steel. He has barricaded himself in. He has the merchandise." One of the men, the largest of the three, stepped forward. He held a crowbar in one hand, the metal glinting dully. "Any problems?" he asked. His voice was deep like gravel grinding in a cement mixer. "He is 72 and has a heart condition," Jessica scoffed, waving a hand dismissively toward the ceiling. "He is practically dead already. Just get the bag and get rid of the problem. We have a timeline. Disposal fee is extra," the man grunted. Jessica nodded. "Just get it done." I tightened my grip on the hammer in my hand. Disposal. That was what I had become. Not a father, not a grandfather, not even a human being. I was refused to be incinerated so that my daughter-in-law could cash a check. But then, movement came from the living room. Damon. My son stepped into the hallway. He looked wrecked. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hair standing up in wild tufts. He looked at the three masked men, and for the first time in days I saw the fog of his greed lift, replaced by the stark, terrifying reality of violence. He looked at the crowbar. He looked at the guns. And then he looked at his wife. Jess Damon's voice cracked. "Who are these guys? You said you were calling a locksmith. You said we were just going to get the bag and put him in a home." Jessica didn't even look at him. "Plans changed, Damon. Your father proved to be more difficult than we anticipated. The police failed. Now we are handling it internally." "Handling it?" Damon stepped between the men and the stairs. His hands were shaking, but he stood his ground. "This is a hit squad, Jess. You are talking about killing him. That is my dad. I didn't sign up for murder." Jessica finally turned to him. Her eyes were dead. "You signed up for the money, Damon. You signed up when you drove the getaway car. You signed up when you helped me bury the empty bag. It is a little late to grow a conscience now. Move out of the way." "No," Damon shouted, spreading his arms. "I am not letting them up there. We can talk to him. I can convince him." Jessica sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. She looked at the lead thug and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. The big man didn't hesitate. He didn't even break stride. He swung his backhand, a heavy gloved fist connecting solidly with Damon's jaw. The sound was sickening, a wet crack that echoed through the house. Damon crumpled like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He hit the floor hard and didn't move. "Damon." I whispered the name, my hand involuntarily reaching out toward the vent, tears stinging my eyes. Even after everything, seeing my boy drop like that tore a hole in my heart. The thug leaned over Damon's unconscious body. He pulled a roll of duct tape from his jacket pocket. "Tie him up," Jessica ordered calmly. "Put him in the kitchen chair. I don't want him getting in the way when the noise starts. And tape his mouth. I am sick of his whining." I watched helpless as they dragged my son's limp body across the floor. They taped his wrists to the back of my kitchen chair, the same chair where he used to sit and do his homework while I cooked dinner. They wrapped the silver tape around his chest, binding him tight. When Damon groaned, waking up to the nightmare, they slapped a piece of tape over his mouth, stifling his scream into a muffled whimper. He looked up at the ceiling, his eyes wide with terror and regret, staring right at the spot where I was hiding. In that moment, he realized what I had known for days. He wasn't a partner in this crime. He was just another loose end. "All right," the leader said, cracking his knuckles. "Let's go shuck this oyster." He signaled to the second man, a wiry guy with a baseball bat. "You go first. Break the lock. I will cover you." I moved away from the vent. The time for watching was over. I crab-walked backward to the far side of the attic, positioning myself behind the heavy workbench. I picked up the blowtorch again, checking the flame. I heard the first heavy footstep on the stairs. Creak. The stairs to the attic were steep and narrow, made of unfinished pine. I had built them myself 30 years ago. I knew every knot, every nail, and every weakness. And an hour ago, while the house was freezing, I had taken my pry bar to the third step from the top. I had pulled the nails out just enough so the tread rested on the riser, looking solid, but waiting for weight to turn it into a slide. Creak. Step 2. I held my breath. The intruder was moving confidently. He thought he was walking up to grab a scared old man. He didn't know he was walking into a machine I had engineered. Creak. Step 3. He was halfway up. I could hear his breathing, heavy and rhythmic. Creak. Step 4. He was getting close to the top. Just 2 more steps to the trap. "I am coming for you, Grandpa," the man shouted, his voice muffled by the mask. "Make it easy on yourself and unlock the door." He took the next step. He shifted his weight, preparing to swing the bat at the door. He planted his heavy boot on the third step from the top. Crack! The wood didn't just break, it sheared away. The tread flipped up like a seesaw. The man's foot plunged through the gap, his momentum carrying his body forward while his legs stayed trapped in the biting wood. There was a sickening snap of bone that sounded like a dry branch breaking in winter. Ah! The scream was raw and animalistic. The man pitched forward, slamming his face into the attic door, then tumbled backward. But his leg was caught. He twisted violently, his knee bending at an angle nature never intended. He hung there for a second, suspended by his broken limb, howling in agony before the wood finally gave way completely, and he tumbled down the steep flight of stairs, taking the second man down with him in a tangle of limbs and cursing. They hit the bottom landing with a crash that shook the house. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. One down. I crawled back to the vent. The scene below was chaos. The wiry man was writhing on the floor, clutching his leg, which was bent sideways below the knee. Bone was visible through the denim of his jeans. He was screaming a high-pitched sound that grated on the nerves. The second man was groaning, rubbing his head where it had hit the wall. Jessica backed away, her hands over her mouth, looking at the broken man with disgust rather than sympathy. "You idiots," she hissed. "It is just a staircase." The leader, the big man who had stayed at the bottom, looked down at his fallen comrade. He didn't offer to help. He didn't call for a medic. He looked up the stairs into the darkness of the attic landing. He saw the missing step. He saw the trap. He pulled a gun from his waistband. It was a long-barreled pistol with a thick cylinder screwed onto the end. A silencer. He aimed up the stairs and fired. Thwip, thwip, thwip. 3 bullets punched through the attic door, sending splinters flying into the darkness. I flinched, covering my head, but I was well out of the line of fire. "He knows the terrain," the leader growled, lowering the gun. He rigged the stairs. "We can't go up there without getting our legs broken." "So what do we do?" Jessica demanded, her voice rising in panic. "We can't stay here all night. The neighbors might hear the screaming." The leader looked at the moaning man on the floor, then at the narrow staircase. He holstered his gun. He reached into his deep coat pocket and pulled out a silver lighter and a small flask. He unscrewed the cap and sniffed it. Lighter fluid. "We don't go up," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We bring him down." He splashed the liquid onto the bottom steps of the wooden staircase. The smell of naphtha drifted up to me, sharp and chemical. No, Damon screamed through the tape, thrashing in his chair. "No, you will kill him, you will burn the house down." The leader ignored him. He looked at Jessica. "We burn him out. Smoke rises. He will either come out coughing with the bag in his hand, or he will cook in that box. Either way, you get your inheritance." Jessica looked at the fluid soaking into the wood. She looked at the house she wanted to sell. For a second I thought she might stop him. I thought the destruction of the property value might be a bridge too far. But then she looked at Damon, bound and useless. She looked at the attic where I was hiding the man who knew her secrets. Her eyes hardened. "Do it," she whispered. The leader flicked the lighter. A small yellow flame danced in the dark hallway. He dropped it. Whoosh! The fire caught instantly, hungry and bright, licking up the dry pine of the banister. The smoke began to curl upward, black and oily, drawn by the draft straight toward the attic. I scrambled back from the vent, coughing, as the first tendrils of acrid smoke hit my throat. The heat was rising fast. My trap had worked, but it had forced their hand. Now the cold wasn't my enemy anymore. The house itself was turning into an oven, and I was trapped in the chimney. I looked at my blowtorch. I looked at the spray lubricant I had used on the floor, and I looked at the window. I had one card left to play, and if it didn't work, the snow outside wouldn't be the only thing melting tonight. The black smoke curled under the attic door, like the fingers of a ghost reaching in to drag me down to hell. It was thick and oily, carrying the scent of burning pine varnish and the terrifying chemical tang of lighter fluid. I coughed, covering my mouth with my sleeve, but the heat was already rising, baking the air in the small space until it felt like the inside of a kiln. The leader of the thugs was right. Smoke rises. If I stayed here hidden behind my workbench, I would be dead in 10 minutes, suffocated before the flames ever touched my skin. I had to move. I had to leave the fortress I had built and venture into the belly of the burning beast. I looked at the ventilation grate near the floor. It was a narrow rectangular opening, barely 18 inches wide, meant to circulate air from the central system. When I built this house 40 years ago, I had installed the ductwork myself using oversized galvanized steel because I wanted the airflow to be efficient. I never imagined that 4 decades later my own body would be the thing trying to squeeze through it. I grabbed a screwdriver from the bench, my hands shaking not from fear, but from the tremors of adrenaline and age. I unscrewed the 4 corners of the grate, the metal screeching in protest as the paint seal broke. I pulled it away and stared into the dark, dusty throat of the house. I am 72 years old. My knees are shot from years on the concrete floor of the assembly line. My back is a road map of old injuries. This was not a movie. I was not an action hero sliding effortlessly through a polished silver tunnel. This was a desperate, painful crawl through a jagged metal coffin. I pushed my bag of tools in first, then I forced my shoulders into the opening. The metal edges dug into my coat, scraping against my ribs. The dust of 40 years' skin cells, pet dander construction grit filled my nose and mouth, making me gag. I crawled on my elbows and stomach, dragging my dead weight inch by agonizing inch. The heat from the fire below was conducting through the metal. The floor of the duct was getting hot against my chest. I could hear the roar of the flames eating the staircase banister just a few feet away through the thin sheet metal. I was crawling through a chimney. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against the steel, threatening to give out long before the fire got me. I thought of Bernice. I thought of how she used to hum while she dusted these very vents. That memory was the only cool thing in a world of fire. I kept moving, counting my breaths. 1, pull, 2, pull. The pain in my shoulders was blinding, a sharp, tearing sensation that told me I was doing permanent damage, but pain is just a signal, and right now I had to ignore the dashboard warning lights and redline the engine. I reached the junction box that sat above the second-floor hallway. Through the slats of the register, I could see flickering orange light dancing on the walls. The fire had not reached the second floor yet, but the smoke was heavy. I kicked the grate out. It clattered onto the hardwood floor below with a sound that seemed deafening. I waited. No gunshots, no shouting. The chaos of the fire and the screaming of the injured man downstairs must have masked the noise. I lowered myself down, my boots hitting the floor with a heavy thud. I collapsed for a second, gasping for air that was cooler but still thick with soot. I was out of the attic. But I was not out of the fire. I stood up, gripping a heavy cast-iron pipe wrench I had pulled from my tool bag. I was covered in gray dust, looking more like a statue than a man. I hugged the wall, moving toward the top of the stairs. The heat was intense now. I could hear the leader shouting orders downstairs, his voice angry and impatient. But where was the second man, the one who had fallen but hadn't broken his leg? I turned the corner toward the master bedroom, and there he was. He was limping, holding his head, scanning the hallway with a pistol in his hand. He was guarding the escape route. He was facing away from me, looking toward the back stairs. He didn't expect the old man to come from the ceiling. I didn't have the element of surprise for long. The floorboard under my boot gave a traitorous squeak. He spun around, raising the gun. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I swung the pipe wrench with every ounce of strength left in my old body. I didn't aim for the head. I aimed for the arm holding the weapon. The heavy iron connected with his forearm with a sickening crunch of bone, meeting metal. He screamed and dropped the gun. It skittered across the floor. He doubled over, clutching his shattered arm. I didn't stop. I swung the wrench again, hitting him in the shoulder, knocking him sideways into the wall. He slid down, groaning, his eyes rolling back in his head. I dropped the wrench and scrambled for the gun. It was a heavy, black, semi-automatic, cold and lethal. I picked it up, pointing it at the slumped figure. My hands were shaking violently. The barrel wavered in the air, drawing erratic circles. I tried to steady my grip using both hands, but the tremors were uncontrollable. I realized then that I couldn't shoot. Not accurately. If I pulled the trigger, I was just as likely to miss and hit a gas line or a stud. I was a mechanic, not a killer. I shoved the gun into my waistband. It was a bluff, not a solution. Suddenly a voice cut through the roar of the fire. "Isaiah! Come out!" It was Jessica. Her voice was shrill, bordering on hysteria. She wasn't downstairs anymore. She had come up to the landing of the main staircase, desperate to end this before the fire department arrived. I crept to the railing of the balcony that overlooked the foyer. The smoke was thick, swirling like a fog of war. Through the haze, I saw her. She was standing near the front door, the firelight illuminating her face. She looked demonic, her mascara running down her cheeks like black tears. And she had Damon. She had cut him loose from the chair, but not to free him. She was holding him by the back of his coat, using him as a shield. And in her hand, pressing against the soft flesh of his throat, was a utility knife, the same box cutter the police had used to slash my sofa cushions. Damon's eyes were wide, pleading, filled with a terror that broke my heart. He wasn't looking at the fire. He was looking up at the darkness of the hallway where I stood. "I know you are up there, old man," Jessica screamed, her voice cracking. "I know you came down. Come out. Give me the bag, or I swear to God I will open his throat right here." She meant it. I could see the madness in her eyes. She had crossed the line from greed to survival. She knew that if she didn't get the money and leave now, she was going to prison for life. Damon was no longer her husband. He was just leverage. "Isaiah, don't make me do it. The police are 5 minutes away. The fire trucks are coming. You give me the diamonds and we walk away. You keep them, and you watch your son bleed out on this floor." I looked at my son. He tried to speak, but the duct tape was still over his mouth. He shook his head frantically. He was begging me. Was he begging me to save him, or was he begging me not to give in? I touched the gun in my belt. I couldn't make the shot. The distance was too far, my hands were too shaky, and she was using him as cover. If I fired, I would hit Damon. I looked around. I needed something bigger, something that spoke the language of the chaos she had unleashed. My eyes landed on the utility closet in the hallway. I knew what was in there. I had stored it there for the snowblower. I kicked the door open and grabbed the red plastic jerry can. It was half full. Gasoline. I unscrewed the yellow cap. The fumes hit me sharp and volatile, mixing with the smoke. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old silver Zippo lighter. I flipped the lid open with a metallic clink. I stepped out of the shadows and onto the top of the landing, right into the flickering orange light of the fire. I must have looked like a nightmare. My face was blackened with soot, my clothes torn, my eyes burning with a cold, hard resolve. I held the open gas can in one hand and the lighter in the other. Jessica looked up. Her eyes went wide. She saw the can, she saw the lighter. "You want to burn me out, Jessica?" I roared, my voice booming over the sound of the flames. "You want to turn my home into hell." I tilted the can, pouring a stream of gasoline down the stairs, splashing it onto the burning banister, creating a firewall between us. The flames leaped up with a ferocious roar, a wall of heat that forced her to step back. "You forgot one thing," I yelled, holding the lighter high. "I lived in hell for 2 years in the jungle, so you could live in this house. I am not afraid of the fire." I stepped closer to the edge, the gasoline sloshing in the can. "Let him go," I commanded, my thumb hovering over the spark wheel of the Zippo. "Let him go, or I drop this can, and we all burn together. There will be no money, no house, just ashes." "Is that what you want?" Jessica stared at me, the knife trembling against Damon's neck. She looked at the wall of fire separating us. She looked at the madman standing on the balcony, ready to incinerate the world. For the first time all night, she looked unsure. She realized she wasn't dealing with a victim. She was dealing with a man who had nothing left to lose. The black smoke curled under the attic door like the fingers of a ghost reaching in to drag me down to hell. It was thick and oily, carrying the scent of burning pine varnish and the terrifying chemical tang of lighter fluid. I coughed, covering my mouth with my sleeve, but the heat was already rising, baking the air in the small space until it felt like the inside of a kiln. The leader of the thugs was right. Smoke rises. If I stayed here hidden behind my workbench, I would be dead in 10 minutes, suffocated before the flames ever touched my skin. I had to move. I had to leave the fortress I had built and venture into the belly of the burning beast. I looked at the ventilation grate near the floor. It was a narrow rectangular opening, barely 18 inches wide, meant to circulate air from the central system. When I built this house 40 years ago, I had installed the ductwork myself using oversized galvanized steel because I wanted the airflow to be efficient. I never imagined that 4 decades later my own body would be the thing trying to squeeze through it. I grabbed a screwdriver from the bench, my hands shaking not from fear, but from the tremors of adrenaline and age. I unscrewed the 4 corners of the grate, the metal screeching in protest as the paint seal broke. I pulled it away and stared into the dark, dusty throat of the house. I am 72 years old. My knees are shot from years on the concrete floor of the assembly line. My back is a road map of old injuries. This was not a movie. I was not an action hero sliding effortlessly through a polished silver tunnel. This was a desperate, painful crawl through a jagged metal coffin. I pushed my bag of tools in first, then I forced my shoulders into the opening. The The metal edges dug into my coat, scraping against my ribs. The dust of 40 years' skin cells, pet dander construction grit filled my nose and mouth, making me gag. I crawled on my elbows and stomach, dragging my dead weight inch by agonizing inch. The heat from the fire below was conducting through the metal. The floor of the duct was getting hot against my chest. I could hear the roar of the flames eating the staircase banister just a few feet away through the thin sheet metal. I was crawling through a chimney. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against the steel, threatening to give out long before the fire got me. I thought of Bernice. I thought of how she used to hum while she dusted these very vents. That memory was the only cool thing in a world of fire. I kept moving, counting my breaths. 1, pull. 2, pull. The pain in my shoulders was blinding, a sharp tearing sensation that told me I was doing permanent damage. But pain is just a signal, and right now I had to ignore the dashboard warning lights and redline the engine. I reached the junction box that sat above the second-floor hallway. Through the slats of the register I could see flickering orange light dancing on the walls. The fire had not reached the second floor yet, but the smoke was heavy. I kicked the grate out. It clattered onto the hardwood floor below with a sound that seemed deafening. I waited. No gunshots, no shouting. The chaos of the fire and the screaming of the injured man downstairs must have masked the noise. I lowered myself down my boots, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. I collapsed for a second, gasping for air that was cooler but still thick with soot. I was out of the attic. But I was not out of the fire. I stood up, gripping a heavy cast-iron pipe wrench I had pulled from my tool bag. I was covered in gray dust, looking more like a statue than a man. I hugged the wall, moving toward the top of the stairs. The heat was intense now. I could hear the leader shouting orders downstairs, his voice angry and impatient. But where was the second man? The one who had fallen but hadn't broken his leg. I turned the corner toward the master bedroom, and there he was. He was limping, holding his head, scanning the hallway with a pistol in his hand. He was guarding the escape route. He was facing away from me, looking toward the back stairs. He didn't expect the old man to come from the ceiling. I didn't have the element of surprise for long. The floorboard under my boot gave a traitorous squeak. He spun around, raising the gun. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I swung the pipe wrench with every ounce of strength left in my old body. I didn't aim for the head. I aimed for the arm holding the weapon. The heavy iron connected with his forearm with a sickening crunch of bone meeting metal. He screamed and dropped the gun. It skittered across the floor. He doubled over, clutching his shattered arm. I didn't stop. I swung the wrench again, hitting him in the shoulder, knocking him sideways into the wall. He slid down, groaning, his eyes rolling back in his head. I dropped the wrench and scrambled for the gun. It was a heavy black semi-automatic, cold and lethal. I picked it up, pointing it at the slumped figure. My hands were shaking violently. The barrel wavered in the air, drawing erratic circles. I tried to steady my grip using both hands, but the tremors were uncontrollable. I realized then that I couldn't shoot. Not accurately. If I pulled the trigger, I was just as likely to miss and hit a gas line or a stud. I was a mechanic, not a killer. I shoved the gun into my waistband. It was a bluff, not a solution. Suddenly, a voice cut through the roar of the fire. "Isaiah, come out!" It was Jessica. Her voice was shrill, bordering on hysteria. She wasn't downstairs anymore. She had come up to the landing of the main staircase, desperate to end this before the fire department arrived. I crept to the railing of the balcony that overlooked the foyer. The smoke was thick, swirling like a fog of war. Through the haze I saw her. She was standing near the front door, the firelight illuminating her face. She looked demonic, her mascara running down her cheeks like black tears. And she had Damon. She had cut him loose from the chair, but not to free him. She was holding him by the back of his coat, using him as a shield. And in her hand, pressing against the soft flesh of his throat, was a utility knife, the same box cutter the police had used to slash my sofa cushions. Damon's eyes were wide, pleading, filled with a terror that broke my heart. He wasn't looking at the fire. He was looking up at the darkness of the hallway where I stood. "I know you are up there, old man," Jessica screamed, her voice cracking. "I know you came down. Come out. Give me the bag, or I swear to God I will open his throat right here." She meant it. I could see the madness in her eyes. She had crossed the line from greed to survival. She knew that if she didn't get the money and leave now, she was going to prison for life. Damon was no longer her husband. He was just leverage. "Isaiah, don't make me do it. The police are 5 minutes away. The fire trucks are coming. You give me the diamonds and we walk away. You keep them and you watch your son bleed out on this floor. I looked at my son. He tried to speak, but the duct tape was still over his mouth. He shook his head frantically. He was begging me. Was he begging me to save him? Or was he begging me not to give in? I touched the gun in my belt. I couldn't make the shot. The distance was too far. My hands were too shaky and she was using him as cover. If I fired, I would hit Damon. I looked around. I needed something bigger. Something that spoke the language of the chaos she had unleashed. My eyes landed on the utility closet in the hallway. I knew what was in there. I had stored it there for the snowblower. I kicked the door open and grabbed the red plastic jerry can. It was half full. Gasoline. I unscrewed the yellow cap. The fumes hit me sharp and volatile, mixing with the smoke. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old silver Zippo lighter. I flipped the lid open with a metallic clink. I stepped out of the shadows and onto the top of the landing, right into the flickering orange light of the fire. I must have looked like a nightmare. My face was blackened with soot, my clothes torn, my eyes burning with a cold, hard resolve. I held the open gas can in one hand and the lighter in the other. Jessica looked up. Her eyes went wide. She saw the can. She saw the lighter. "You want to burn me out, Jessica?" I roared, my voice booming over the sound of the flames. "You want to turn my home into hell?" I tilted the can, pouring a stream of gasoline down the stairs, splashing it onto the burning banister, creating a firewall between us. The flames leaped up with a ferocious roar, a wall of heat that forced her to step back. "You forgot one thing," I yelled, holding the lighter high. "I lived in hell for 2 years in the jungle so you could live in this house. I am not afraid of the fire." I stepped closer to the edge, the gasoline sloshing in the can. "Let him go." I commanded, my thumb hovering over the spark wheel of the Zippo. "Let him go, or I drop this can and we all burn together. There will be no money, no house, just ashes. Is that what you want?" Jessica stared at me, the knife trembling against Damon's neck. She looked at the wall of fire separating us. She looked at the madman standing on the balcony, ready to incinerate the world. For the first time all night, she looked unsure. She realized she wasn't dealing with a victim, she was dealing with a man who had nothing left to lose. Dưới đây là nội dung chi tiết cho phần 10 của Lượng Ngoạn Mục, được viết hoàn toàn bằng tiếng Anh theo văn phong kể chuyện ngôi thứ nhất tối ưu hóa cho việc đọc voice over truyền cảm xúc AI voice friendly. The fire on the stairs was not just a barrier, it was a statement. I stood on the landing, the heat singeing the hair on my arms, looking down at the people who had turned my life into a chaotic hellscape. The red jerry can in my hand felt heavy, sloshing with the liquid promise of total destruction. I looked into the eyes of the masked leader, the man who had ordered my house burned, and I saw something flicker behind his cold gaze. It was not fear of death, it was fear of loss. He was a businessman of violence, and I was threatening to bankrupt him. I raised the can higher, letting a few more glugs of gasoline splash onto the hardwood floor at my feet. The fumes rose up sharp and dizzying, mixing with the acrid smoke of the burning banister. I held the Zippo lighter in my other hand, the small yellow flame dancing in the draft, a tiny sun that controlled the gravity of the room. "You want the diamonds," I shouted, my voice raspy but loud enough to cut through the roar of the fire. "You think they are in a bag somewhere? You think I hid them in the chimney or buried them in the yard? You are wrong." I took a step back, moving closer to the master bedroom door. "They are right here, under the floorboards of my bedroom, wrapped in rags and soaked in old paint thinner." It was a lie, a desperate, calculated lie born from the mind of a man who had nothing left but his wits. I had hidden the bag in the chimney clean-out downstairs, but they didn't know that. They didn't know the layout of this house, they only knew what they saw. And what they saw was a crazy old man standing on top of a powder keg holding the match. I kicked the floorboard near my feet. It was loose, rattling against the joist. "One drop," I said, lowering the lighter inches from the gas-soaked carpet. "One drop from this lighter and the master bedroom goes up like a Roman candle. The floor melts, the diamonds melt, or they get buried under 2 tons of burning debris. You will never sift through the ashes fast enough to find them before the cops get here." I looked at Jessica. Her face was a mask of horror. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the imaginary fortune beneath my feet. She did this for money. She ruined her life, my son's life, and my life for carbon compressed into shiny rocks. And now I was threatening to send those rocks back to the hell they came from. "You are bluffing!" Jessica screamed, her voice shrill and breaking. "You wouldn't burn your own house down. You love this place. You promised Bernice you would take care of it. Don't you speak her name? I roared, the anger exploding out of me. You forfeited the right to speak about this family when you put a knife to my son's throat. This house is already dead, Jessica. You killed it the moment you walked in the door. Now we are just negotiating the funeral arrangements. I tilted the can again. This time I poured a line of gasoline across the threshold of the bedroom, creating a fuse. Let him go, I commanded, staring at the thug leader. Walk away. Leave the boy. Leave the house. And maybe, just maybe, I won't strike this lighter. The leader of the thugs stood still. He was doing the math. He looked at the fire on the stairs, which was growing larger by the second. He looked at his injured partner groaning on the floor. He looked at Jessica, who was trembling, holding the box cutter against Damon's neck with a grip that was slipping from sweat and fear. He lowered his gun. This was supposed to be a grab and go. The leader growled, his voice deep and vibrating with frustration. You said he was a soft target. You said he was senile. He is, Jessica shrieked. He is bluffing. Shoot him. Shoot him in the leg and risk hitting the gas can. The thug snapped back. If that vapor ignites, we all blow out the windows. I am not dying for your retirement fund, lady. The internal structure of their alliance began to fracture right before my eyes. It was brittle, held together only by greed, and I had just removed the profit margin. The thug holstered his weapon. He took a step back, away from the stairs, away from Jessica. We are leaving, he announced. What? Jessica spun around, her eyes wide. You can't leave. We have a deal. The deal is dead, the thug said, motioning to his partner. Grab the cripple. Let's go. No, Jessica screamed. She was losing everything. The diamonds, the muscle, the plan. She looked at the thug, then she looked at me. Desperation twisted her beautiful face into something ugly and unrecognizable. She realized she was alone. The thugs were cutting their losses. Damon was useless. I was the enemy. Greed is a powerful drug. It overrides survival instincts. It overrides logic. And in that moment, Jessica overdosed on it. She pushed Damon away violently. My son crashed into the wall, sliding down to the floor, gasping for air through the tape on his mouth. Jessica didn't look at him. She looked at me. Or rather, she looked past me into the bedroom where she believed her future was buried. I am not leaving without that bag, she screamed. She did something insane. She ran. She didn't run away. She ran toward the fire. She leaped over the burning banister, her expensive coat catching a spark as she flew through the smoke. She landed on the stairs, stumbling but scrambling upward on her hands and knees, ignoring the heat, ignoring the flames licking at her boots. She was possessed. Jessica, stop. I yelled, stepping back. She didn't stop. She reached the top of the landing, her eyes wild, her teeth bared like a feral animal. She lunged at me. I tried to swing the heavy metal gas can to block her, but she was fast. She slammed into my chest, knocking the wind out of me. We crashed onto the floor of the hallway. The gas can flew from my hands, spinning across the floorboards. Glug, glug, glug. The red plastic container hit the wall and tipped over. The gasoline poured out in a heavy, pungent wave, soaking the carpet, soaking my pant leg, soaking Jessica's coat. The fumes were instantly overpowering. My eyes watered, my throat burned. We were rolling around in a pool of accelerant, two desperate souls wrestling on the edge of an inferno. Jessica clawed at my face, her nails digging into my skin. Give it to me. Where is it? Which floorboard? She was pounding on my chest, screaming, crying, completely unhinged. She didn't care that we were soaked in gas. She didn't care that the fire from the stairs was creeping closer inch by inch, feeding on the oxygen we were fighting for. I grabbed her wrists, trying to hold her back. She was younger, but I had the strength of a man who had tightened bolts on engine blocks for 40 years. I pinned her arms down, but she thrashed and kicked her boot, connecting with my bad knee. Pain shot up my leg, blinding me for a second. The Zippo. I realized with a jolt of terror that I had dropped the lighter when she tackled me. I twisted my head frantically, scanning the floor. It was lying on the carpet about 3 feet away. It was still lit. The small yellow flame was flickering upright, a tiny beacon of doom, and the puddle of gasoline was spreading toward it. It was like watching a fuse burn in slow motion. The clear liquid soaked into the fibers of the rug, darker and darker, inching closer to the metal casing of the lighter. Jessica saw it too, but she didn't pull back. She reached for it. Not to put it out, but to grab it, to use it as a weapon against me. I kicked out, pushing her away, scrambling backward on my elbows. My clothes were soaked. If that vapor caught, I would be a human torch. Jessica scrambled to her knees. She looked at the lighter. She looked at the bedroom door. She looked at me. "I will burn it all," she shrieked, her voice unrecognizable. "If I can't have it, nobody can." She lunged for the lighter. I closed my eyes, bracing for the heat, bracing for the end. I had played my hand. I had bluffed. And now the house was calling it. I thought of Bernice. I hoped she would be waiting for me. I hoped she wouldn't be too mad about the house. The silence before the explosion is always the loudest part, but the explosion didn't come. Instead, a sound cut through the chaos, a sound so loud, so authoritative it seemed to vibrate the very bones of the burning house. "This is the FBI. We have the perimeter secured. Come out with your hands up." The voice boomed from a megaphone outside, echoing off the snow, cutting through the shattered windows. Jessica froze. Her hand hovered inches from the lighter. Her face went slack. The madness in her eyes was replaced by a sudden, crushing clarity. FBI, not Sheriff Miller, not her high school friend, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The thug leader downstairs shouted something unintelligible. I heard the sound of the back door being kicked open as they tried to run. I heard the crash of flashbang grenades going off in the yard. Bang, bang. White light strobed through the windows. I looked at Jessica. She was paralyzed. The reality of her situation crashed down on her like a collapsing roof. It wasn't over. She hadn't won. She hadn't even tied. She had lost. I reached out with a trembling hand and grabbed the Zippo lighter. I snapped the lid shut. Click. The flame died. I lay back on the gas-soaked carpet, gasping for air, listening to the sound of heavy boots storming the porch and the beautiful, chaotic symphony of justice smashing through the front door. Etta May. She had done it. The cleaning lady from the Bottoms had brought down the cavalry. I looked at my son, who was slumped against the wall, weeping silently behind his gag. "It is over, Damon," I whispered, my voice breaking. "It is finally over." But as I looked at Jessica, I saw her hand move. She wasn't reaching for the lighter anymore. She was reaching into her pocket. She pulled out the box cutter. She looked at me, and for a second I thought she was going to attack again. But she didn't lung at me. She stood up shaky and soaked in gasoline and backed away toward the open window of the bedroom. She wasn't going to jail. Not without one last act of defiance. The room exploded into a kaleidoscope of white light and sound. The flashbang grenades detonated in the foyer with a deafening crack that felt like it reset the rhythm of my heart. For a second, the world was nothing but a high-pitched ringing and a blinding white haze. But through the disorientation, I saw the beautiful, chaotic choreography of a raid. The front door did not just open. It was taken off its hinges by a battering ram, landing on the gasoline-soaked rug with a heavy thud. Men in body armor poured into my home like a flood of black water. They moved with a precision that made the thugs' earlier violence look like amateur hour. The leader of the crew, the man who had ordered my murder just moments ago, tried to run for the back kitchen door. He didn't make it 3 steps. An agent tackled him, driving his face into the hardwood floor with enough force to rattle the china in the cabinet. I heard the distinct metallic click of handcuffs ratcheting shut. The second thug, the one with the broken arm, was already on his knees, wailing, his hands raised in surrender, begging not to be shot. I lay back against the wall on the landing, the smell of gasoline still burning my nostrils, watching the tide turn. A team of firefighters pushed past the tactical unit wielding extinguishers. They blasted the burning staircase with clouds of white chemical foam. The fire, which had threatened to consume everything I owned, hissed and died, smothered under a blanket of cold snow. The heat vanished, replaced by the freezing winter air rushing in through the shattered windows. My house was a wreck. It was wet, frozen, broken, and smelled of smoke and chemicals. But it was still standing. And so was I. An agent climbed the ladder to the landing where I was sitting. He had the letters FBI emblazoned in yellow on his back. He didn't point a gun at me. He reached out a gloved hand. "Mr. Jefferson," he asked, his voice calm amidst the shouting. "I am Agent Ross. We received a call from a Ms. Etta May. You are safe now, sir." I took his hand. It was steady. I hauled myself up my old joints, screaming in protest. I looked down into the foyer. They were hauling the thugs out, dragging them by their collars like sacks of garbage. But there was one person who was not being dragged. One person who was not silent. Jessica. She was pressed against the wall by 2 agents, her expensive coat ruined by gasoline and foam, her hair plastered to her face. They were trying to cuff her, but she was fighting. Not with her fists, but with her mouth. She was screaming, her voice shrill and desperate, cutting through the din of the room. "Get off me! You are making a mistake. I am the victim here. It is him. It is the old man. She pointed a shaking finger up at me. Her eyes were wide, manic, filled with the terrifying conviction of a liar who believes her own story. He is the mastermind, Jessica shrieked, twisting in the agent's grip. Isaiah Jefferson is the one who planned the jeweler's exchange heist. He used my husband and me as pawns. He forced us to drive the car. He threatened to kill us if we didn't help him. The audacity of the lie took my breath away. Even in handcuffs, even covered in gasoline, she was still trying to manipulate the narrative. She was trying to paint a 72-year-old retired assembly line worker as a criminal kingpin. Agent Ross looked at me, then down at the screaming woman. He didn't look convinced, but he signaled for his men to let her speak. He has the diamonds, Jessica yelled, seeing that she had a sliver of attention. He stole them from us. He is hiding them right now. Why do you think he was ready to burn the house down? He is crazy. He is hoarding stolen property. She was panting, her chest heaving. She looked at Damon, who was sitting on the floor, the tape removed from his mouth, looking at the ground in shame. Tell them, Damon. Tell them your father forced us to do it. Damon didn't look up. He didn't speak. He just shook his head slowly, a single tear cutting through the soot on his cheek. He was done lying. You want proof? Jessica screamed, realizing she was losing her audience. Check the chimney. The clean-out door in the basement. I saw him hiding something there. He put the bag in the chimney. If I am lying, why is the bag there? The room went quiet. The agents looked at each other. Jessica's specific detail had struck a chord. Liars usually stay vague. Truth-tellers give coordinates. And she was giving them a coordinate. Agent Ross looked at me. Is there something in the chimney, Mr. Jefferson? I leaned against the railing, feeling the weight of the Zippo lighter in my pocket. I looked at Jessica. She was grinning now, a feral, triumphant smile breaking through her panic. She thought she had me. She thought that even if she went down, she would drag me down with her for possession of stolen goods. She thought she had played her ace. Go look, I said, my voice raspy. Agent Ross motioned to two of his men. Check the basement. Chimney clean out. Jessica watched them go, her eyes gleaming. She stopped struggling. She stood up straighter, adjusting her ruined coat. You will see, she hissed at the agent holding her arm. You will see who the real criminal is. He hid it. He tried to double-cross the investors. I was just trying to get the merchandise back to the authorities. We waited. The silence in the house was heavy, punctuated only by the crackle of police radios and the dripping of melting snow. Minutes stretched like hours. Jessica kept her eyes locked on me, her expression shifting from fear to a smug arrogance. She knew the bag was there. She knew I hadn't destroyed it. Then we heard footsteps coming up the basement stairs. The two agents returned. One of them was carrying a black nylon duffel bag. It was covered in soot, and one corner was melted and fused together where it had been too close to the heat of the fire I had set earlier. Jessica let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. There, she shouted. I told you, the black bag. That is the bag from the robbery. He had it all along. She looked at me, her eyes screaming victory. I got you, old man. I got you. Damon finally looked up. He saw the bag. He closed his eyes and let his head drop back against the wall. He knew what was in that bag. He remembered carrying it into the house. He remembered the weight of the gold and the diamonds. He thought his father was going to prison. Agent Ross took the bag. He set it down on the gasoline-soaked coffee table in the middle of the ruined living room. He looked at the melted corner. He looked at the heavy zipper. Jessica leaned forward, her face hungry. Open it. Count it. There is $500,000 in there, and he stole it. Arrest him. I stood on the landing looking down. I didn't say a word. I just watched. Agent Ross put on a pair of fresh latex gloves. He grabbed the zipper tab. The sound of the zipper opening was loud in the quiet room. Zip. Jessica held her breath. She was waiting for the sparkle. She was waiting for the vindication that would turn her from a villain into a whistleblower. Agent Ross reached into the bag. He pulled the wide mouth of the duffel open so the overhead lights could hit the contents. Jessica's smile froze. Her mouth fell open. The blood drained from her face so fast she looked like a corpse. There were no diamonds. There were no Rolexes. There was no gold. Agent Ross reached in and pulled out a handful of the contents. It was not jewelry. It was a pile of dirty, oil-stained rags, old underwear, and 3 heavy red clay bricks. The agent dropped the rags back into the bag. He looked at Jessica, his expression unimpressed. "This is your $500,000, Ross asked dryly. Jessica made a sound like a strangling bird. "No, no. That is impossible. I saw it." Damon brought it in. It was heavy. It clinked. She spun toward me, her face contorted with shock and rage. "What did you do? Where is it? You switched it, you senile old bat! Where did you put the diamonds?" I looked down at her from the high ground. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked at her with the pity one feels for a creature that doesn't realize its back is already broken. "I told you, Jessica," I said softly. "I was just fixing the fence." Agent Ross zipped the bag of trash closed. "Get her out of here," he ordered. "But wait." Ross paused. He reached back into the side pocket of the bag. There was one more thing inside. A small black digital recorder. He pulled it out. He pressed the play button. Jessica's voice, clear and arrogant, filled the room from the tiny speaker. "When the old man kicks the bucket, we are rich. Free and clear, just to have the papers ready. I will call you the second his heart stops." Jessica stopped screaming. She stopped fighting. She stared at the recorder in the agent's hand as if it were a poisonous snake. She realized then that the bag wasn't just a decoy. It was a coffin, and she had just nailed herself inside it. The sound of the zipper opening was the loudest thing in the world. It was a slow, rasping tear that seemed to echo off the walls of my ruined living room, cutting through the heavy silence that had fallen over the scene. Agent Ross wore blue latex gloves, and his face was a mask of professional detachment, but I saw the slight tightening of his jaw. He was expecting diamonds. He was expecting the glitter of a stolen fortune that would make his career. Jessica was leaning forward so far she was almost losing her balance. Her eyes were wide manic, reflecting the overhead lights, hungry for the vindication she believed was just inches away. She had bet her life, her freedom, and her soul on the contents of that black nylon bag. She had burned my house, tied up her husband, and tried to kill me, all for what lay inside that dark opening. Agent Ross pulled the bag wide open. The overhead light hit the interior. Jessica stopped breathing. Her smile, which had been growing wider by the second, froze in place. It didn't fade. It shattered. It broke apart into a kaleidoscope of confusion and horror that was more satisfying to me than any physical blow I could have landed. There was no sparkle. There was no gold. There was no velvet. Agent Ross reached in. He didn't pull out a Rolex. He didn't pull out a diamond necklace. He reached his gloved hand into the depths of the bag and pulled out a handful of gray, oil-stained cotton. It was a pair of my old work boxers, torn graying and smelling faintly of motor oil and mildew. He dropped them on the table. They landed with a soft, pathetic plop next to the recorder. Jessica let out a sound that wasn't human. It was a high-pitched wheeze like a balloon losing air. Her eyes darted from the underwear to the bag, then to Ross, then to me. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No. Dig deeper. It is under the clothes." He hid it under the clothes to cushion them. Agent Ross looked at her, his expression shifting from curiosity to annoyance. He reached back into the bag. He grabbed something heavy at the bottom. Jessica gasped. This was it. The weight. The gold. Ross grunted as he heaved the object out. He slammed it onto the coffee table. Clunk. It was a red clay brick, chipped, covered in dried mortar, and utterly worthless. He reached in again. Another brick. Clunk. And a third. Clunk. The 3 bricks sat on the table, surrounded by a pile of dirty laundry. They looked ridiculous. They looked like garbage. But to Jessica, they looked like a life sentence. "Is this a joke?" Agent Ross asked, wiping brick dust off his gloves. "Is this your idea of a federal case, ma'am? 3 bricks and a pile of dirty laundry?" Jessica's knees gave out. She didn't fall. She just sank, held up only by the agents gripping her arms. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. "It is impossible," she stammered, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. It was heavy. I felt it. Damon carried it in. It clinked. I heard it clink. She turned her head slowly toward me. Her eyes were bloodshot wide with a terrifying realization. She looked at me not as a senile old man, but as a ghost who had walked through walls. "You," she hissed. "You switched it." I stood on the landing looking down at her. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The truth was written in the pile of garbage on the table. I let my mind drift back to that first night, the night of the blizzard, the night I became a ghost in my own home. While Jessica was in the shower thinking she was the smartest person in the room and Damon was out getting coffee thinking he had buried his sins, I had been busy. I had gone out to the oak tree. I had dug up the bag. I had felt the weight of the diamonds, the cold, heavy promise of wealth that had corrupted my family. But I knew I couldn't just take it. If the bag disappeared, they would tear the house apart until they found it, or they would torture me until I spoke. I needed them to find the bag. I needed them to believe they were still in control right up until the moment the trap snapped shut. So I took the diamonds out. Every watch, every ring, every bracelet. I shoved them into an old metal ammunition box I kept in the shed. Then I needed weight. I needed the bag to feel right. I walked to the pile of renovation debris behind the garage. I grabbed 3 heavy paving bricks. They weighed about the same as 20 pounds of gold and jewelry. I wrapped them in my old work clothes to stop them from sliding around, to muffle the sound, to make it feel like bundles of cash or velvet-wrapped gems. I zipped the bag shut. It looked perfect. It felt perfect. But that wasn't enough. I needed to catch her. I needed physical proof that she knew about the bag, that she had handled it, that she was the one trying to hide it. So I didn't just hide the bag. I prepared it. I wiped the handle clean with rubbing alcohol. Then I placed it in the chimney, clean out a place I knew she would eventually check, or a place I could direct the police to. But the real stroke of genius, the move that I was most proud of, was where I put the real diamonds. I didn't bring them into the house. The house was compromised. I took that ammo box heavy with the stolen loot, and I walked past the oak tree. I walked to the small stone marker at the edge of the property line. Buster. My old golden retriever. The dog Damon had loved as a boy. The dog Jessica had called a flea-bitten nuisance. I dug a hole next to his grave. The ground was frozen, but anger gave me strength. I buried the diamonds 6 feet down right next to the bones of the only creature in this family that had ever been truly loyal. I covered it up, smoothed the snow, and walked away. I knew they would never look there. Jessica didn't have a heart, so she wouldn't think to look in a graveyard. She only looked for value in things she could sell, not in things that held memories. Back in the present, the silence in the living room was shattered by a scream that sounded like glass breaking. "You old bastard!" Jessica had snapped. The reality of the bricks, the dirty underwear, the absolute humiliating defeat was too much for her mind to handle. She lunged. She broke free from the agent on her left with a surge of hysterical strength. She didn't run for the door. She didn't run for Damon. She ran for the stairs. She ran for me. "I will kill you." She shrieked, her hands clawing at the air, her face twisted into a mask of pure hate. "Give it back. Give me my life back." She made it to the bottom step. She put her boot on the charred wood of the staircase I had set on fire, but she didn't get any further. Agent Ross moved with the speed of a striking cobra. He tackled her from behind, driving her into the gasoline-soaked carpet. "Use of force authorized," he shouted. 2 other agents piled on. Jessica fought like a wildcat. She was kicking, biting, screaming obscenities that would make a sailor blush. She wasn't a socialite anymore. She wasn't a grieving daughter-in-law. She was a monster revealed. It took 3 men to subdue her. They wrenched her arms behind her back, the handcuffs clicking shut with a sound of finality. They dragged her up her feet, kicking uselessly at the floor. "Where is it?" she screamed, saliva flying from her mouth. "Tell them where it is, Isaiah. Don't let them take me without the money." Agent Ross stood up, straightening his tie. He looked down at her with cold disgust. "Get her out of here, and read her the rights." Again. They dragged her out the front door. Her screams faded into the night air, mixing with the sirens until finally the heavy door slammed shut, cutting off the noise. The house fell silent again. The fire was out. The smoke was clearing. Damon was still sitting on the floor, his head in his hands, weeping softly. He hadn't moved. He hadn't tried to help her. He hadn't tried to help me. He was just a broken piece of furniture in a broken house. Agent Ross walked over to the table. He looked at the bricks. He looked at the dirty underwear. He picked up one of the bricks, weighing it in his hand, a small smile playing on his lips. "That was a hell of a switch, Mr. Jefferson," he said. "You had us all fooled. For a minute there, I thought we were going to be booking you for grand larceny." He dropped the brick back onto the table. Dust puffed up into the air. He turned slowly to face me. He walked to the bottom of the stairs and looked up. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and no longer friendly. The camaraderie of the rescue was gone. Now he was just a federal agent, and I was a man who had admitted to possessing stolen property, even if I had just used it as bait. He took off his gloves, tucking them into his pocket. He crossed his arms. "You played a dangerous game, Isaiah. You tampered with evidence. You obstructed a federal investigation. You set a trap that could have killed people." He paused, letting the weight of the law hang in the air between us. But he continued, his voice softer. "I can overlook the procedural errors considering the duress you were under. You handed us the ringleader and the recording on a silver platter. Or rather, on a pile of bricks." He took a step up the stairs. The wood creaked under his weight. "However, there is one loose end, Mr. Jefferson." He locked eyes with me. "The jewelry store inventory lists $4 million in uncut diamonds and high-end watches. We have the bricks, we have the underwear, we have the confession." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a shout. "So I have to ask you, and I need you to think very carefully about your answer. Where is the real merchandise, Mr. Jefferson? Because if it is not in that bag, and it is not in the chimney, then you are the only person on earth who knows where it is." I looked at him. I looked at the ruin of my home. I touched the empty pocket where I used to keep dog treats for Buster. The agent waited. The question hung in the air like smoke. And for the first time that night, I realized that surviving the family was the easy part. Surviving the truth might be what finally killed me. The silence in the living room was heavy, a suffocating blanket that settled over the wreckage of my home. The air still smelled of gasoline and the sharp chemical tang of the fire extinguisher foam. But the heat of the moment had evaporated, replaced by the bone-chilling cold blowing in through the shattered windows. Agent Ross was looking at me, his eyebrows raised, waiting for an answer to the question that would decide the rest of my life. He wanted to know where the real diamonds were. He had the bricks. He had the dirty laundry. But he needed the evidence that would put Jessica and her crew away for a federal stretch, not just a state robbery charge. I adjusted my coat, feeling the ache in my knees flare up. I looked at Damon, who was still slumped against the wall, a broken man in a ruined house. Then I looked at Ross. "If you want the truth," I said, my voice raspy from the smoke, "you need to bring a shovel. And bring him, too." I pointed at Damon. Agent Ross nodded to his team. 2 agents hauled Damon to his feet. He didn't resist. He moved like a sleepwalker, his eyes fixed on the floor, his wrists bound tightly behind his back. I led the procession out the sliding glass door and into the backyard. The scene was surreal. The floodlights from the police perimeter turned the night into a stark, high-contrast movie set. The snow was blindingly white, disturbed only by the chaotic footprints of the raid team. But I didn't walk toward the spot where Damon had frantically dug days ago. I didn't walk toward the patio. I walked toward the old oak tree, the sentinel that had watched over this family for 40 years. I stopped at the small, humble stone marker at the base of the trunk. It was covered in a light dusting of fresh snow, but the name engraved on it was still visible. Buster. Damon made a sound. It was a sharp intake of breath, a sound of pain. He remembered this spot. He remembered the day we buried that dog, crying together in the rain, father and son, united in grief. Now we stood here as strangers, united only by a crime. "It is here," I said, pointing to the earth next to the grave. Agent Ross didn't hesitate. He grabbed a shovel from one of the tactical officers. He didn't dig with the frantic, greedy energy that Damon had shown. He dug with the methodical precision of the law. The blade cut through the frozen crust, lifting heavy chunks of dark, icy soil. Clang. The sound of metal striking metal rang out in the cold air. Ross knelt down. He brushed away the loose dirt and pulled out a rusted olive-drab metal box. It was an old ammunition crate surplus from my days in the service. It was watertight, airtight, and tough as nails, just like the man who buried it. Ross set the box on the snow. He popped the latches. They snapped open with a loud crack. He lifted the lid. The floodlights caught the contents, and for a moment the backyard seemed to sparkle. There they were. The diamonds, the gold watches, the tennis bracelets, piled high, cold, and indifferent to the human misery they had caused. Agent Ross let out a low whistle. "Well, I will be damned. That is the whole inventory." But I wasn't looking at the jewels. I reached into the box, my hand brushing past a diamond necklace worth more than my entire pension, and pulled out the one thing that mattered more than all the gold in the world. It was a small, black, digital voice recorder. "This," I said, holding it up so Damon could see it, "is why we are here. The diamonds are just theft, Agent Ross. Theft gets you 5 to 10 years with good behavior. But this is life without parole." Damon looked at the recorder. His face was pale, confused. He didn't know what it was. He thought it was just more evidence of the robbery. "Play it," I said to Ross. "Play it for him. He needs to hear what his wife really thinks of his father." Ross took the recorder. He pressed the small play button. The volume was turned up all the way. The static hissed for a second, and then Jessica's voice cut through the winter night. It was crystal clear, recorded the day I hid in the hallway while she was on the phone. "No, honey, don't worry about the payment. I am telling you it is a matter of days, maybe hours. He is old, his heart is basically garbage. We switched the protocol this morning." Damon's head snapped up. His eyes went wide. He stopped breathing. The recording continued, Jessica's voice laughing, a cold, casual sound that was more terrifying than a scream. "Yeah, the policy is solid. Double indemnity for accidental death. Once the old man kicks the bucket, we are rich, free and clear. Just have the papers ready. I will call you the second his heart stops." Click. The tape ended. The silence that followed was absolute. The wind stopped howling. The police radio seemed to go mute. The only sound was the harsh, ragged breathing of my son. He stared at the recorder in Agent Ross's hand as if it were a radioactive isotope. The reality crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just a robbery. It wasn't just about paying off debts. It was a hit, an assassination. And the target was his father. She switched the pills," Damon whispered. His voice was so quiet I almost couldn't hear it. "She told me she was just giving you sleeping aids. She said she just wanted you to sleep through the night so we could search the house." He looked at me, his face crumbling. "She was poisoning you." I looked at him, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. I didn't feel triumph. I felt only a deep, aching sadness. "She was killing me by inches, Damon," I said softly. "And she was going to use the inheritance to leave you. You were never her partner. You were just her getaway driver and her scapegoat." Damon's legs gave out. He fell to his knees in the snow right next to the open grave of the dog he used to love. He didn't cry. He howled. It was a guttural animal sound of pure agony. He realized in that moment that he had lost everything. He had betrayed the father who raised him for a woman who was planning to step over his father's corpse to get to a bank account. He had no wife. He had no father. He had no freedom. He was alone in the cold, surrounded by men with guns and the wreckage of his own stupidity. Agent Ross looked down at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. He gestured to his men. "Get him up. Bag the evidence. We are done here." 2 agents hauled Damon to his feet. He was dead weight. He didn't look at me as they dragged him toward the squad car. He just stared at the ground, his spirit broken, his life effectively over. I stood by the oak tree as they cleared the scene. I watched them photograph the diamonds. I watched them seal the ammo box in an evidence bag. I watched the flashing lights fade as the convoy pulled away, taking the poison out of my life. Agent Ross was the last to leave. He shook my hand. "You will have to come down to the station to give a formal statement, Mr. Jefferson," he said. "But for tonight, we have posted a guard at the front. Try to get some sleep. You earned it. Sleep." The word sounded foreign to me. I walked back into my broken house. I sat in the armchair that Jessica had slashed open. I looked at the spot on the rug where the gasoline had soaked in. I was safe. I was alive. But the house felt enormous and empty. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. The next morning, I sat in the interrogation room at the Federal Building. It was a gray, windowless box that smelled of stale coffee and fear. I had signed my statement. I had handed over the falsified pill bottle. I had done my duty as a citizen. I stood up to leave, buttoning my coat, ready to walk out and never look back. But then the door opened. Agent Ross stepped in. He looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Jefferson," he said, keeping his hand on the door handle. "We have a situation." "What kind of situation?" I asked. "It is your son," Ross said. "He has been processed. He has waived his right to an attorney. He is confessing to everything, the robbery, the conspiracy. He is giving us names of the investors. He is burying himself." "Good," I said, my voice hard. "He should." Ross nodded. "He is. But he has made a request. He is refusing to sign the final confession until he sees you." I froze. I looked at the one-way mirror on the wall, seeing my own reflection. Old, tired, alone. "I have nothing to say to him," I said. "He knows that," Ross replied softly. "He doesn't want you to talk. He says he just needs 5 minutes. He says he needs to ask you one question. I gripped my cane. I felt the anger rising again, but beneath it the dull ache of a father's love that refused to die completely. One question, I asked. Ross nodded. Just one. I stood there for a long minute. I thought about the boy who used to run to the door when I came home from the factory. I thought about the man who had taped my mouth shut. I thought about the pills. Let him in, I said. I sat back down at the metal table. The door opened again. The chains rattled before I saw him. Damon shuffled in wearing an orange jumpsuit that was too big for him. He looked 10 years older than he had yesterday. His eyes were swollen. He sat down across from me. He didn't look up. He stared at his handcuffed hands resting on the table. We sat in silence for a long time. The hum of the ventilation system was the only sound in the room. Finally, Damon lifted his head. He looked me in the eye. There was no malice left, no greed, just a profound, crushing sorrow. "Dad," he whispered. I didn't answer. I just waited. "I know I am going away for a long time," he said, his voice trembling. "I know you hate me, and you should, but I need to know one thing. It is the only thing that matters to me now." He took a deep breath, fighting back tears. "That night, the night of the blizzard, when you went out to the yard to switch the bag." He paused, choking on the words. "Why didn't you just leave? Why didn't you take the diamonds and run? You could have gone anywhere. You could have left us to the investors. You could have let them kill us. Why did you stay and fight for a house that we were trying to steal from you?" I looked at my son. I saw the confusion in his eyes. He lived in a world of transactions where people only did things for profit. He couldn't understand why I had walked into the fire instead of walking away from it. I leaned forward, placing my rough, calloused hands on the cold metal table. "Because Damon," I said softly, "I didn't stay for the house." The visiting room at the county detention center smelled of industrial pine cleaner and unwashed bodies. It was a cold, sterile scent that stuck to the back of your throat. I sat on a metal stool that was bolted to the floor, my hands resting on the stainless steel ledge in front of the thick plexiglass partition. I looked at my reflection in the glass. The soot was gone, scrubbed away by a long, hot shower, but the lines in my face seemed deeper than they had been 48 hours ago. I looked like a man who had survived a war but lost his country. The heavy steel door on the other side buzzed and clanked open. A guard stepped in, followed by a figure in bright orange. Damon. He looked small. That was the first thing I noticed. My son, who had always walked with a swagger, who had filled a room with his loud voice and his expensive cologne, now looked shrunken. His shoulders were hunched. His head was shaved, stripping away the stylish fade he spent $50 a week maintaining. He shuffled to the seat, his wrists chained to his waist. He sat down, and when he finally lifted his eyes to meet mine, I saw the wreckage of a human being. He reached for the black phone on the wall. His hands were shaking so bad he almost dropped the receiver. I picked up mine. The plastic felt greasy against my ear. "Dad," he choked out. The word came out as a sob. I didn't say anything. I just watched him. "Dad, you have to help me." He started, the words tumbling out in a frantic, desperate rush. "It is a nightmare in here. You don't know what it is like. The guys in the holding cell, they know I was the driver. They know about the diamonds. They think I snitched. I can't stay in General Pop, Dad. They will kill me before trial." He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against the glass, tears streaming down his face. "It wasn't me, Dad. You have to believe me. It was Jessica. She is a monster. She manipulated me. She told me we were just going to borrow the money to pay off the investors. She never told me about the poison. I swear on Mom's grave I didn't know she was poisoning you." I listened to him lie. I listened to him try to rewrite history 5 minutes after the ink had dried on his police statement. I knew he knew. I had seen the look in his eyes at dinner when I fed the cat. He might not have poured the poison, but he had watched me lift the spoon to my lips and said nothing. "She made me do it, Dad," he continued, his voice rising in hysteria. "She threatened to leave me. She said I was a loser. I just wanted to make her happy. I just wanted to be the man she wanted. Please, you have to get me a lawyer, not a public defender, a real lawyer, someone who can cut a deal. If I testify against her, maybe I can get probation, but I need money for the retainer. Please, Dad, sell the truck, mortgage the house, anything. Just get me out of here." He was begging for my life savings to save him from the consequences of trying to end my life. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. But I didn't laugh. I felt a strange, cold calm settling over me. It was the calm of a surgeon who realizes the limb cannot be saved and must be amputated. I let him cry for another minute. I let him expend all his excuses, all his blame, all his pathetic attempts to turn himself into a victim. When he finally stopped gasping for air, wiping his nose on his sleeve, I leaned into the microphone. "Damon," I said softly. He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "Yeah, Dad. Do you know what the weather was like on November 14th, 1988? He blinked, confused. "What?" "It was a Tuesday." I continued, my voice steady and low. It was raining. Not a heavy rain, but that cold, miserable Detroit drizzle that chills you to the bone. I was working a double shift at the plant. We were assembling the transmissions for the new F-150s. My foreman came over and tapped me on the shoulder. He said, "Isaiah, you better get to Sinai Hospital. Your wife is asking for you." Damon stared at me, his mouth slightly open. "Dad, why are you talking about this? We don't have time." "I didn't clock out," I said, ignoring him. I ran all the way to the parking lot. I drove my old Buick like a madman. When I got to the delivery room, Bernice was already holding you. You were so small. You were a month premature. You fit in the palm of one of my hands. I held up my hand, the rough, calloused hand of a mechanic against the glass. You were purple and screaming. You were fighting the world from the second you took your first breath. The doctor said you might have lung problems. He said you might be weak. But I looked at you, and I didn't see weakness. I saw a miracle. I paused, looking deep into the eyes of the man in the orange jumpsuit. I took your little finger, Damon. Your hand was so tiny your fingernails were like paper, and you squeezed my finger. You held on so tight, and in that moment, standing in that hospital room with the rain hitting the window, I made a promise to God. I said, "Lord, I don't care what happens to me. I don't care if I break my back working. I don't care if I never own a new car or a fancy suit. Just let me protect this boy. Let me build a world where he never has to be hungry, where he never has to be afraid, where he can be a good man." Tears welled up in Damon's eyes again, but these were different. These weren't tears of fear. They were tears of shame. "I kept that promise, Damon," I whispered. "I worked 60 hours a week for 30 years. I took the overtime. I skipped the vacations. I fixed up that house with my own blood and sweat so you would have a backyard to play in. I paid for your college. I paid for your wedding. I paid for your mistakes." "Dad, stop." Damon sobbed. "Please. No. You listen," I commanded, my voice hardening. "I spent my life building a shelter for you. And what did you do? You invited the wolves in. You didn't just open the door, Damon. You held it open while they tried to burn it down with me inside." "I didn't mean to," he stammered. "You taped my mouth shut," I said, cutting him off. "You watched a stranger hit me. You watched your wife hold a knife to my throat. You dug a hole in my backyard to hide a felony. That is not a mistake, Damon. That is a choice." I stood up. The metal stool scraped loudly against the concrete floor. Damon panicked. "Dad, where are you going?" "What about the lawyer? What about bail?" I looked down at him. I didn't see my son anymore. I tried to find the baby from the hospital, the boy who learned to ride a bike, the teenager who took me to his graduation. But they were gone. They had been erased, replaced by this stranger in an orange suit who would sell my corpse for a reduced sentence. I reached into my coat pocket. I pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a check. It was a form from the bail bondsman. "This is the bail hearing notification," I said. "They called me this morning. They said since I am the victim, I have a say in whether you are granted bond." Damon's eyes lit up. "You signed it. You are going to vouch for me." I took a pen from my pocket. I smoothed the paper out on the stainless steel ledge. "The son I loved. The boy named Damon Jefferson died 2 nights ago." I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "He died when he decided that money was worth more than his father's life." I wrote in the box marked "Victim Statement." I wrote 2 words. "No bail." Then I signed my name. Isaiah Jefferson. The signature was firm. It didn't tremble. I pressed the paper against the glass so he could read it. "Dad, no." Damon whispered, his face going pale. "You can't do this. I am your flesh and blood." I put the paper back in my pocket. "Blood makes you related, Damon. Loyalty makes you family. You are just a stranger who broke into my house." I hung up the phone. Damon started screaming. He slammed his fists against the glass. He was yelling, begging, cursing. His face was twisted into a mask of ugly desperation. But the glass was soundproof. I couldn't hear him. I could only see a mouth moving a silent movie of a man drowning in his own consequences. I turned my back on him. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Every instinct in my body, every biological wire programmed to protect my offspring screamed at me to turn around, to save him, to fix it one last time. But I kept walking. I walked toward the heavy steel door. I signaled the guard. The buzzer sounded. I stepped out of the visiting room and into the corridor. The heavy door clanged shut behind me, sealing the tomb. I walked down the long linoleum hallway, past the other families waiting to visit, past the lawyers with their briefcases, past the officers with their guns. I walked out the front entrance of the detention center. The automatic doors slid open and the winter air hit me. It was cold, crisp, and clean. The sky was a brilliant, piercing blue, the kind of sky you only get after a terrible storm has passed. The sun was shining on the snowdrifts in the parking lot, making them glitter like millions of tiny diamonds. I stood on the sidewalk taking a deep breath. My lungs filled with cold air. I was free. I was alive. The poison was gone. The threat was gone. But as I walked to my car, I felt a hollow ache in the center of my chest. I reached for my phone to call Bernice, a reflex I hadn't been able to shake in 5 years. Then I remembered she was gone. I reached to text Damon to tell him I was okay. Then I remembered he was gone too. I sat in the driver's seat of my old Ford, staring at the empty passenger seat. I had won the war. I had defeated the enemy. I had saved my house and my dignity. But as I put the key in the ignition, I realized the terrifying truth of victory. I had absolutely no one left to share it with. I looked at the road stretching out in front of me. It was open. It was clear. But for the first time in 72 years, I had no idea where I was going. 6 months later, the courtroom smelled of lemon floor wax and old lies. I sat in the back row, my hands resting on the head of my cane, watching the final act of a tragedy I never wanted to write. Jessica had spent the last week turning the trial into a theater production. She had traded her designer silk robes and diamond earrings for a modest gray cardigan and a simple white blouse buttoned all the way to her throat. She wore no makeup, leaving her face pale and drawn. To the jury, she looked like a broken woman, a victim of circumstance coerced by a violent husband and a senile father-in-law. She wept on the stand. She wept with the practiced elegance of a silent film star, dabbing at eyes that were dry just seconds before the jury looked her way. She told stories about how terrified she was, about how Damon had threatened her, about how I had psychologically abused her. It was a masterclass in manipulation. I watched the jury. I saw the older men leaning forward, captivated by her beauty and her tears. I saw the doubt creeping into their eyes. They looked at Damon, who sat slumped at the defense table, looking like a ghost in a cheap suit, and they saw a thug. They looked at Jessica, and they saw a damsel in distress. She was winning. She was going to walk away with a slap on the wrist, leaving my son to rot in prison alone. The injustice of it tasted like copper in my mouth. My lawyer, the public defender, shook his head, knowing we were losing the narrative. Jessica's defense attorney, a slick man with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, rested his case, confident that his client's performance had secured her freedom. But then the prosecutor stood up. He was a young man, sharp and hungry. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the judge. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls a rebuttal witness, one who was not on the original list due to protective custody concerns. We call Etta Mae Robinson to the stand." The air in the courtroom changed instantly. Jessica's head snapped toward the double doors. The tears stopped. The mask slipped just for a fraction of a second, revealing the snarling animal beneath. The doors opened, and 2 federal marshals escorted a small woman in a Sunday hat and a pressed floral dress down the aisle. Etta Mae walked with her head high. She didn't look at the gallery. She didn't look at me. She walked straight to the witness box. She looked like the grandmother everyone wished they had, but when she sat down and placed her hand on the Bible, she became a giant. Jessica's lawyer jumped up, objecting, shouting about surprise witnesses and procedural violations, but the judge silenced him with a wave of his hand. The federal nature of the case allowed for certain exceptions, and Etta Mae was the exception that broke the rule. "Ms. Robinson," the prosecutor began, "can you tell the court where you were on the night of November 14th? Etta leaned into the microphone. Her voice was quiet but steady, a calm river cutting through stone. I was in the custodial closet of the jeweler's exchange. I was hiding behind a rack of mops because I was afraid to breathe. She pointed a finger not at Damon but at Jessica. I saw her. I saw Mrs. Jefferson. She wasn't crying that night. She wasn't scared. She was laughing. The courtroom went dead silent. Etta described the robbery in vivid, terrifying detail. She described how Jessica punched in the codes, how she mocked the security guards they had tied up. But then Etta went deeper. She peeled back the layers of Jessica's character, exposing the rot underneath. I worked at that store for 5 years, Etta said, her eyes fixed on Jessica. Mrs. Jefferson was the manager. For 5 years, she never called me by my name. She called me the help or simply you. When I cleaned her office, she would open the window while I was still in the room as if the air I breathed was dirty. She used to wipe down the phone after I touched it. She told the other managers that they needed to watch the black staff closely because stealing was in our nature. Jessica's face turned a violent shade of red. She whispered something to her lawyer, but he ignored her. That night, Etta continued, Jessica told her husband to leave the back door unlocked. She said it would be easy to blame the night shift. She said nobody cares what happens to an old black cleaning lady. She said I was invisible. Etta paused and looked directly at Jessica. I am not invisible, Mrs. Jefferson. I am the one who saw you steal. I am the one who saw you betray your family, and I am the one telling the truth today. The jury turned. It was a physical shift in the room. The sympathy evaporated, replaced by cold, hard disgust. They didn't see a victim anymore. They saw a predator who used racism and privilege as a weapon. Jessica realized she had lost. She stood up screaming at Etta, calling her a liar, using words that I will not repeat, words that proved everything Etta had just said. The judge banged his gavel, threatening to hold her in contempt, but Jessica was beyond reasoning. She was a narcissist watching her reflection shatter. 3 days later, the verdict came down. It was swift, and it was brutal. The judge, a stern woman who had no patience for theatrics, read the sentencing. Jessica Jefferson was found guilty on all counts, including grand larceny, conspiracy to commit murder, and tampering with federal evidence. She was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. When the gavel fell, Jessica didn't cry. She just stared at the wall, her eyes empty, her life as a social climber officially over. Damon stood up next. He pleaded guilty. He showed remorse. But the law is a machine, and it does not care about your feelings. 15 years. That was the price of his weakness. He looked back at me as the marshals cuffed him. He mouthed the words, "I am sorry." I nodded once, acknowledging the apology but not accepting the debt. It was paid in full now. And there was one more casualty, Sheriff Miller. The investigation into Jessica's phone records revealed the calls, the cover-ups, and the willful negligence. He wasn't in the courtroom, but the news had broken that morning. He had been stripped of his badge and was facing a grand jury indictment for corruption. The network of lies that had protected Jessica had been dismantled brick by brick. I walked out of the courthouse into the blinding afternoon sun. The media was there, cameras flashing, microphones thrust in my face, asking how it felt to see justice served. I pushed past them. I didn't feel triumph. I felt exhausted. I felt the weight of 72 years pressing down on my spine. A week later, the mail arrived at my new address. I was living in a small rented trailer on the edge of town, having sold the house immediately after the trial. I opened the envelope. It was from the insurance company that insured the jeweler's exchange. It was a check, a reward for the recovery of the merchandise. 10% of the recovered value, $50,000. I held the piece of paper in my hand. It was more money than I had ever seen at one time in my life. It was enough to buy a new truck, enough to travel, enough to live comfortably for the rest of my days. I drove back to the old house one last time before the new owners took possession. It stood empty against the gray sky, the windows repaired, but the scars of the fire still visible on the siding. The oak tree stood silent in the backyard, guarding the empty hole where I had buried the diamonds. I stood on the porch, looking at the check in my hand, and then at the empty driveway where my son used to park his bike. $50,000. That was the price of my family. That was the exchange rate for a son and a legacy. I felt a hollow ache in my chest that no amount of money could fill. I had won the war, but the battlefield was a graveyard. I folded the check and put it in my pocket. I needed a reason to keep moving. I needed to find a way to turn this blood money into something that could grow. I turned my back on the house and walked to my car. As I reached for the handle, my phone buzzed. It was Etta May. "Isaiah," she said, her voice sounding excited. "I found something. You know that community center downtown? The one they are threatening to close? They are selling the building." I looked at the house one last time, then I looked at the road ahead. "Tell me more, Etta," I said. "I think I might have just enough for a down payment." I got into the car and drove away, leaving the ghosts behind, ready to build something new from the ashes. The sold sign went up on the front lawn on a Tuesday morning, and by Thursday afternoon the house was gone. I did not haggle over the price. I did not care about the market value or the equity I had built up over 40 years of mortgage payments. I just wanted to be free of the walls that had witnessed the death of my family. Walking through the empty rooms for the final time was strange. I expected to feel grief. I expected to feel the heavy pull of memories, the echo of Bernice's laughter in the kitchen, the ghost of Damon running down the hallway in his pajamas. But the house was silent. The fire and the betrayal had burned the nostalgia right out of the drywall. It was just a structure now, wood and brick and glass that held nothing for me but the stench of greed and the shadow of a son who had tried to bury me in my own backyard. I left the keys on the kitchen counter next to the final utility bill. I did not look back at the oak tree. I did not look at the patch of earth where the diamonds had been buried. I walked out the front door and locked it behind me for the last time. As I walked down the driveway, I felt a physical weight lift off my shoulders. It was the weight of obligation, the weight of being the protector, the provider, the father. I had carried it for so long I had forgotten what it felt like to just be a man walking in the sunlight. I got into my old sedan and drove away. I did not look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind me worth seeing. With the check from the house sale and the reward money from the insurance company, I had a small fortune sitting in my bank account. For a man who had counted pennies his whole life, it was a dizzying amount of freedom. I could have bought a condo in Florida. I could have moved into a high-end assisted living facility where they cut the crusts off your toast. But I did not want to wait to die. I had spent the last week fighting for my life, and now I wanted to use it. I went to a dealership on the outskirts of town. I walked past the shiny sports cars and the luxury sedans. I went straight to the back lot where the recreational vehicles were parked. I bought a 30-foot Winnebago. It wasn't brand new, but the engine was solid, a diesel pusher that sounded like a heartbeat I could understand. It had a kitchenette, a queen-sized bed, and a windshield big enough to show you the whole world at once. But a ship needs a crew, and I knew exactly who I wanted in the navigator's seat. I drove the beast of a vehicle down to the bottoms, navigating the narrow, potholed streets until I reached the rundown tenement building where Etta May lived. I parked right in front the RV, taking up 3 spaces, looking like a spaceship that had landed in a war zone. I climbed down and knocked on her basement door. Etta opened it wearing her cleaning smock, looking tired. When she saw the RV behind me, her eyes went wide. "Isaiah," she said, wiping her hands on a rag. "What in the world is that?" "That is the future." "Etta," I said, leaning on my cane. "I sold the house. I am leaving Detroit. I am going to see the Grand Canyon. I am going to see the Pacific Ocean. I am going to find a place where it never snows." She looked at me, then at the RV, then back at the grim concrete walls of her apartment. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked softly. "Because I don't want to go alone," I said. "You saved my life, Etta. You were the only person in this city who saw me when I was invisible. You are the only family I have left." I held out a hand. "Pack a bag, Etta. We have a lot of miles to cover." For a second I thought she would say no. I thought she would say she was too old or too tired, or that it was crazy for 2 old folks to run away like teenagers. But then a smile broke across her face. It was a beautiful smile, one that took 20 years off her life. She didn't ask where we were going. She didn't ask when we would be back. She just turned around, grabbed a worn leather suitcase from under her bed, and started throwing clothes into it. 10 minutes later, she was sitting in the passenger seat, buckling her seatbelt. She looked at the dashboard, then out the window at the gray streets she had scrubbed and cleaned for decades. "I have never been west of Michigan," she whispered. "Well," I said, turning the key, "today is a good day to start." The diesel engine roared to life. I put it in gear, and we rolled forward. The city of Detroit, with its factories and its memories, its prisons and its graveyards, began to slide away. We hit the highway, merging into the traffic, just 2 silver-haired travelers in a house on wheels. I looked over at Etta. She had rolled down the window and was letting the wind blow through her hair. She was laughing at something on the radio. Then I looked at my own hands on the steering wheel. They were old hands, scarred, knotted with arthritis, but they were steady. For the first time in years, the shaking had stopped. The emptiness I had felt leaving the prison was gone, filled by the hum of the tires on the asphalt and the presence of a friend who asked for nothing but my company. I thought about Damon one last time. I thought about him sitting in his cell surrounded by walls of his own making. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel hate. I just felt a distant, quiet pity. He had chased gold and found iron bars. I had chased the truth and found the open road. A smile touched my lips. It wasn't a forced smile for a camera or a polite smile for a neighbor. It was real. It came from deep inside my chest, from a heart that the doctor said was failing but felt stronger than it had in 20 years. I turned up the radio. B.B. King was playing. The blues, but I didn't have the blues. Ready? I asked Etta. She looked at me, her eyes shining. Drive Isaiah, she said. Yeah, she. Just drive. And I did. I drove into the sunset, leaving the snow and the sorrow behind, finally understanding that home isn't a place you build with bricks. It is a place you find when you are finally brave enough to leave everything else behind. We spend our lives building shelters for our children, hoping to protect them from the storms of the world. But sometimes the storm isn't outside. It grows right under our roof, fed by greed and entitlement. I learned that blood connects us, but it doesn't define loyalty. Standing alone in truth is far less lonely than sleeping in a house full of lies. When you finally clear the snow from your yard, make sure you are ready to see what is really buried underneath. Sometimes the only way to save your own life is to let go of the hand that is pulling you down. We spend our entire lives trying to build a legacy for our children, hoping to shelter them from the storm. But I learned the hard way that sometimes the storm is growing right under your own roof. Blood might connect us biologically, but it does not guarantee loyalty. True family isn't defined by DNA. It is defined by who stands beside you when the house is on fire. I realized that it is better to live in a trailer with peace of mind than to sleep in a mansion with one eye open. If you ever find yourself holding a shovel in the snow to hide the truth from your own kin, remember this: you do not owe your life to the people who are trying to take it from you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is cut the cord and drive away. If you think I made the right choice by walking away from my son, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments below, is there anything a child could do that would make you cut them out of your life forever? I'll be reading your answers from the road.